If you're lying here right now with your mind spinning in circles, fighting the same thoughts over and over, I need you to know something that changed everything for me. There's a reason why your anxiety feels impossible to stop, why every technique you've tried only works temporarily, and why the harder you fight your worries, the stronger they become. And it's not what you think. 2,500 years ago, a man sat under a tree and discovered the one thing that stops mental suffering at its source. Not managing it, not coping with it, actually stopping it. Tonight, I'm going to share that secret with you. Welcome to Moon Mind Temple, where ancient wisdom meets your modern struggles. If it feels right, drop a comment and tell me where you're listening from. Are you wide awake in Chicago, finding a quiet moment in Mumbai, or settling into bed somewhere across this beautiful world? There's something powerful about knowing we're all breathing together right now. Before we dive into these life-changing teachings, get yourself completely comfortable. Grab that blanket. Find your coziest position. Let your eyes close if that feels good. Because what you're about to discover isn't just another relaxation technique. This is the Buddhist secret to why resistance creates suffering and how the simple art of letting go can transform your entire relationship with anxiety. You don't need to believe anything or know anything about Buddhism. You just need to be here, ready to stop fighting yourself. Let's begin. The first thing you need to understand is that what you're experiencing right now, that spinning mind, that constant mental chatter, that exhausting fight against your own thoughts, isn't a personal failing. It's not evidence that you're broken or weak or doing something wrong. It's simply what happens when we've learned to meet life with resistance instead of acceptance. Right now, as you're settling into this moment, there are millions of people around the world experiencing exactly what you're feeling. There's someone lying awake in a city apartment, replaying a work conversation from 3 days ago, editing their words, rehearsing what they should have said instead. There's a parent standing in their kitchen at midnight, quietly worrying about their teenager who won't talk to them, wondering where they went wrong. There's a person scrolling through their phone, comparing their real life to everyone else's highlight reel, that familiar voice whispering that they're somehow falling behind. This pattern of mental struggle has become so normal in our world that we barely notice it anymore. We resist the traffic that makes us late, the co-worker who doesn't understand our point, the weather that doesn't match our plans. We resist our own emotions when they feel inconvenient, resist uncertainty when it makes us uncomfortable, resist change even when we desperately want things to be different. We've learned to meet almost every moment with some form of inner tension, some subtle fight against what is. But here's what's fascinating, and this is where the Buddha's insight becomes revolutionary. This resistance isn't just uncomfortable. It's literally creating the very suffering we're trying to escape. When you fight anxiety, you're actually feeding it more energy, giving it more importance in your life. When you resist sadness, you're keeping it alive longer than it needs to stay. When you argue with what's already happened, you're preventing yourself from moving into what could be. Your body knows this truth, even when your mind doesn't. Notice right now, are your shoulders carrying tension from arguments that happened last week? Is your jaw clenched against words you wish you hadn't spoken? Is your stomach tight with worry about events that may never occur? This is what resistance looks like in the body, a constant, low-level state of bracing against life. We've been taught that this kind of mental vigilance is necessary, even virtuous. Our culture celebrates the person who never stops thinking, who anticipates every problem, who takes responsibility for managing everyone's feelings. We wear our worry like a badge of honor, proof that we care, evidence that we're not giving up. But what if this approach, this constant mental resistance to life as it unfolds, is actually the source of our exhaustion? From childhood, we learn to fight discomfort rather than understand it. When things don't go according to plan, we're taught to push harder, try more, never give up. The message becomes clear. If you're not constantly working to improve or fix or change your situation, you're being lazy or irresponsible. And so we learn to meet life with clenched fists instead of open hands, with resistance instead of receptivity. The physical toll of all this fighting is real and measurable. When your mind is constantly at war with reality, your nervous system stays activated, your immune system weakens, your sleep becomes fragmented. You develop tension that rest never quite releases, fatigue that sleep never quite cures. Your body, designed to help you respond to actual threats, becomes hijacked by imaginary battles with what is. But here's the truth that changes everything, and this is what the Buddha discovered under that tree 25 centuries ago. This suffering isn't inevitable. While pain is part of life, the additional layer of suffering we create through our resistance is completely optional. We can learn to experience difficult emotions without drowning in them, face challenging circumstances without being destroyed by them, navigate uncertainty without being paralyzed by it. What if everything we've been taught about how to handle life's challenges is backwards? What if the harder we fight, the more trapped we become? What if the answer isn't more effort, more control, more management of our inner and outer worlds? What if there's another way entirely, one that our ancestors understood, but that we've somehow forgotten in our rush toward productivity and control? You're about to discover that other way, and it begins with understanding something that will probably surprise you about how effort actually works. The man who sat beneath that Bodhi tree 25 centuries ago wasn't seeking to become a religious figure or start a movement. Prince Siddhartha was simply a human being who had grown weary of suffering, his own and that of everyone around him. He had lived in luxury, experienced every pleasure imaginable, yet still felt a deep dissatisfaction, a gnawing sense that something fundamental was missing. When he finally left his sheltered palace and encountered the realities of illness, aging, and death, he became determined to understand why life seemed to inevitably involve pain. What he discovered during those years of searching would revolutionize our understanding of human suffering. Sitting in deep meditation, watching his own mind, with the patience of a scientist observing a natural phenomenon, he began to see something extraordinary. The suffering wasn't coming from the external circumstances themselves. It was coming from his mind's relationship to those circumstances. It was his resistance, his craving for things to be different, his refusal to accept what was already happening, that created the torment. This insight was so profound, so contrary to everything people believed about suffering, that it took him weeks to decide whether he should even try to teach it. How could he explain that we are, in large part, the creators of our own misery? Not because we're bad people, not because we deserve pain, but because we've never learned to distinguish between the inevitable challenges of life and the unnecessary suffering we add on top of them. Let me share a simple example that might help this make sense. Imagine you're driving to an important meeting and you hit unexpected traffic. You're going to be late, and there are real consequences. Your boss might be frustrated, clients might be disappointed, opportunities might be missed. This is what the Buddha called pain, the natural, unavoidable difficulties that are part of being human. The traffic exists, the lateness is real, the consequences are happening. But then notice what your mind does next. It starts a running commentary. This always happens to me. I should have left earlier. Now they'll think I'm irresponsible. Why didn't I check the traffic report? Your body tenses, your blood pressure rises, your hands grip the steering wheel until your knuckles turn white. You replay past instances of being late. Imagine worst-case scenarios for this meeting. Mentally rehearse apologies and excuses. This is what the Buddha called suffering, the layer of mental anguish we add on top of life's natural challenges. The traffic is the same whether you're calm or stressed about it. The lateness is the same whether you accept it or fight it. But the difference in your experience, the difference between pain and suffering, is enormous. One person arrives at their meeting late but present, able to focus on solutions and move forward. Another arrives late and scattered, their mind still trapped in the traffic jam, their energy depleted by the mental battle they've been fighting for the past 30 minutes. This distinction between pain and suffering becomes even clearer when we look at how two different people can experience the same event in completely different ways. Consider Sarah and Emma, both teachers who received critical feedback from their principal on the same day. Sarah spent the entire evening replaying the conversation, analyzing every word, building a case for why the feedback was unfair, imagining how she could defend herself, losing sleep over what her colleagues might think. Emma felt the sting of disappointment, acknowledged her mistakes, asked herself what she could learn, and then let it go, spending her evening grading papers and calling her sister. Same feedback, same potential for growth or discouragement, but completely different amounts of suffering. Sarah was fighting reality, the reality that the feedback was given, that her pride was hurt, that making mistakes is part of being human. Emma met reality with acceptance, experienced the natural pain of criticism, and then moved forward without adding layers of mental resistance. This is where the Buddha's insight becomes truly revolutionary. He saw that most of what we call suffering isn't actually about what happens to us. It's about our refusal to let what happens simply be what it is. We argue with the past, trying to rewrite conversations that already occurred. We fight the present, demanding that our current circumstances match our preferences. We resist the future, exhausting ourselves trying to control outcomes that haven't even emerged yet. But here's where it gets even more interesting, and this is the paradox that changes everything. The harder we fight against our difficult experiences, the stronger and more persistent they become. Have you ever noticed that the more desperately you try to fall asleep, the more awake you feel? The more you tell yourself not to think about something, the more it occupies your mind. The tighter you grip a relationship out of fear of losing it, the more the other person seems to pull away. This isn't coincidence, it's how the mind works. When you resist an experience, you're actually giving it more energy, more attention, more importance in your life. Think about anxiety for a moment. Most people approach anxiety as an enemy to be defeated, a problem to be solved, a feeling to be eliminated as quickly as possible. So they fight it, they distract themselves, avoid triggers, try to think positive thoughts, research coping strategies. And while these approaches might provide temporary relief, they often make the anxiety stronger in the long run. Why? Because the underlying message you're sending to your nervous system is that anxiety is dangerous, that it's something to be feared. You're confirming anxiety's power over you by treating it as a threat. The more you fight it, the more your mind learns to be afraid of it, and the more easily it gets triggered in the future. Meet David, a sales manager who developed panic attacks after a particularly stressful presentation went poorly. His first instinct was to fight the panic. He would hold his breath, tense his muscles, tell himself to calm down, and flee any situation that might trigger another episode. The more he fought, the more unpredictable and intense the panic became. It wasn't until he learned to stop resisting the sensations, to breathe with them rather than against them, to let them move through his body without adding the story that something was wrong, that the panic attacks began to lose their grip on his life. Or consider Lisa, who struggled with chronic sadness after her mother's death. Well-meaning friends kept telling her she should move on, think positive, focus on the good memories. Lisa tried to follow this advice, pushing away her tears, staying busy to avoid feeling the grief, putting on a brave face for everyone around her. But the sadness didn't disappear. It went underground, showing up as exhaustion, irritability, and a growing sense of numbness toward everything she used to enjoy. Only when she stopped fighting her grief, when she allowed herself to feel the full depth of her loss without judging it as wrong or excessive, did she begin to find her way back to life. This is the profound paradox the Buddha discovered. The very act of resisting our experience keeps us trapped in it. What we push away gains power over us. What we try to control controls us. What we refuse to feel continues to demand our attention until we're finally willing to turn toward it with acceptance rather than resistance. But this insight raises a crucial question. If fighting our difficulties makes them worse, if resistance creates suffering, if our attempts to control our inner experience actually trap us more deeply, then how do we actually deal with life's challenges? How do we respond to anxiety, sadness, anger, fear, or frustration without either drowning in them or building walls against them? How do we find the middle path between being overwhelmed by our emotions and disconnecting from them entirely? The answer lies in understanding something that most of us have never been taught, that there's a completely different way to relate to our inner experience. Instead of seeing difficult emotions as problems to be solved or enemies to be defeated, we can learn to see them as information, as energy, as temporary visitors passing through the vast space of our awareness. Instead of bracing against life's challenges, we can learn to move with them, like a tree that bends in the storm but doesn't break. This isn't about becoming passive or giving up on positive change in your life. It's about recognizing that true strength comes not from rigid resistance, but from flexible responsiveness. It's about understanding that peace isn't the absence of difficulty, it's the capacity to remain centered in the midst of whatever arises. It's about discovering that when you stop fighting life, you finally have the energy and clarity to engage with it skillfully. The Buddha called this understanding the end of suffering, not the end of pain, but the end of the unnecessary layer of mental anguish we create through our resistance to what is. And once you begin to taste this freedom, once you experience what it's like to meet a difficult moment without adding the weight of resistance on top of it, your whole relationship with life begins to transform. You start to see that emotions, even uncomfortable ones, are actually quite manageable when you're not fighting them. You discover that uncertainty, while not always pleasant, doesn't have to be terrifying when you're not demanding certainty. You realize that conflict, disappointment, and change are all workable experiences when you're not insisting that they shouldn't be happening. This shift doesn't happen overnight, and it doesn't require perfect execution. It's a gradual awakening to a different way of being, a gentle training in non-resistance that begins with small moments of acceptance and grows into a completely new way of moving through the world. It starts with understanding not just intellectually, but in your bones, in your nervous system, in your lived experience, that fighting life is optional. So how do we actually stop the fight? How do we move from a lifetime of resistance to a way of being that flows with life rather than against it? How do we practically apply this ancient wisdom to our modern struggles with anxiety, stress, and the countless small frustrations that make up our daily experience? The answer begins with understanding something the ancient Taoists called Wu Wei, the art of effortless action, and it's going to change how you approach everything from your morning routine to your most challenging relationships. Let's explore this together. Now that we understand how resistance creates suffering, let's explore the 4 insights that can set you free from this unnecessary struggle. The Buddha called these the 4 Noble Truths, but don't let the formal name intimidate you. Think of them as a doctor's diagnosis and treatment plan for the human condition, a practical guide to understanding why we suffer and how we can find relief. These truths aren't religious doctrine or abstract philosophy. They're observations about how life works, insights you can test and verify in your own experience. The first truth is simply this: difficulty is woven into the fabric of human existence. This isn't a pessimistic view of life, it's a realistic one. We live in bodies that age, get sick, and eventually die. We form relationships that sometimes bring conflict, misunderstanding, and loss. We have minds that worry, compare, and sometimes feel overwhelmed by the complexity of modern life. We face changes we didn't choose, disappointments we didn't expect, and uncertainties we can't resolve. Here's what's liberating about accepting this first truth. When you stop pretending that life should be free from challenge, you stop taking difficulties personally. Instead of asking, "Why is this happening to me?" you start asking, "How can I move through this with grace?" Instead of feeling singled out by problems, you recognize them as part of the shared human experience. Think about Elena, a mother whose 8-year-old son was diagnosed with a learning disability. Her first response was to search for someone to blame: the school system, her own parenting choices, genetic factors she couldn't control. She exhausted herself, researching cures, interviewing specialists, and trying to fix what she saw as a problem that shouldn't exist. Everything shifted when she finally accepted the first truth, that challenges like this are part of life, not evidence that something had gone wrong with her family. This acceptance didn't mean giving up hope for her son's growth. It meant stopping the additional suffering that came from fighting against reality and channeling her energy into actually helping him thrive. Or consider Marcus, a small business owner who spent months raging against the economic changes that were affecting his industry. He felt victimized by forces beyond his control, bitter about having to adapt strategies that had worked for years. The turning point came when he realized that business challenges, economic shifts, and the need to evolve were simply part of entrepreneurship, not personal attacks on his efforts. Once he stopped resisting the reality of change, he could focus his energy on creative adaptation rather than futile resistance. The first truth also helps us understand that emotional pain isn't a sign that something is wrong with us. Sadness after loss, anxiety before important events, frustration when things don't go as planned, these are natural human responses, not character flaws that need to be eliminated. When you accept that difficult emotions are part of life, rather than problems to be solved, you can finally stop judging yourself for having them. This brings us to the second truth. While pain is inevitable, the additional layer of suffering we create through our resistance is entirely optional. This is where the Buddha's insight becomes revolutionary. He saw that most of what we call suffering isn't actually about what happens to us. It's about our mental relationship to what happens to us. Imagine two people dealing with the same challenge, let's say getting passed over for a promotion they really wanted. The first person spirals into self-doubt, spends weeks analyzing what they did wrong, compares themselves to the person who got the job, and carries resentment that affects their work performance and relationships for months. The second person feels disappointed, allows themselves to grieve the loss, asks for feedback about how to improve, and then redirects their energy toward new opportunities. Same event, but completely different amounts of suffering. The difference isn't in their circumstances, it's in how they relate to those circumstances. The first person is fighting reality, adding layers of story and resistance on top of the natural disappointment. The second person is experiencing the pain without multiplying it through mental resistance. This second truth shows us where our power actually lies. While we can't always control what happens to us, we can learn to change our relationship to what happens to us. We can stop adding the second arrow of resistance to the first arrow of life's natural challenges. We can experience disappointment without devastation, criticism without collapse, uncertainty without panic. Consider Sarah, who struggled with chronic anxiety about her teenage daughter's choices. She would lie awake, imagining worst-case scenarios, spend hours researching dangers her daughter might encounter, and exhaust herself trying to control situations that were largely beyond her influence. The anxiety about her daughter's safety was natural. That's the first arrow, the pain that comes with loving someone. But the endless worry loops, the catastrophic thinking, the attempts to control her daughter's every decision, that was the second arrow, the suffering she was adding through her resistance to uncertainty. When Sarah learned to feel her love and concern without feeding the anxiety spiral, she discovered she could actually be more present and helpful to her daughter. The third truth offers hope. This additional suffering can end. Not because life becomes perfect, but because we can learn to stop creating unnecessary pain on top of life's natural challenges. This doesn't mean becoming emotionless or indifferent. It means developing the capacity to feel everything fully without being destroyed by it. Like learning to swim, you don't stop feeling the water, but you no longer fear drowning in it. This truth is particularly powerful because it puts the end of suffering within reach. You don't have to wait for your circumstances to change, for other people to behave differently, or for the world to become a safer, more predictable place. The freedom from unnecessary suffering is available right now, in this moment, through learning to meet whatever arises without adding the weight of resistance on top of it. Think about James, who discovered this truth during a particularly difficult period when he lost his job. His father was diagnosed with cancer, and his marriage was struggling. Instead of getting swept away by the story that his life was falling apart, he learned to meet each challenge individually, without the overlay of, "This shouldn't be happening," or "I can't handle this." The pain of each situation was real and appropriate, but he stopped multiplying it through resistance. To his surprise, he found he could handle much more than he thought possible when he wasn't also fighting against the reality of his circumstances. The fourth truth provides the practical path forward. There are specific ways to cultivate this freedom from unnecessary suffering. This isn't about positive thinking or forcing yourself to feel differently than you do. It's about developing the skills to meet your experience with awareness rather than reactivity, with acceptance rather than resistance. This path includes learning to observe your thoughts and emotions without being swept away by them, like watching clouds pass through the sky of your awareness. It involves cultivating compassion for yourself and others as you all navigate this challenging human experience together. It includes developing wisdom, the ability to see situations clearly rather than through the filter of your fears and desires. The path also involves understanding that peace isn't something you have to create or achieve. It's something you uncover by removing the obstacles you've been placing in front of it. Like clearing debris from a stream, when you stop damming up the natural flow of life with resistance, the water moves freely again. Meet Rebecca, a nurse who worked in a high-stress emergency department. She used to come home each night, carrying the weight of every patient she couldn't save, every family member she couldn't comfort enough, every system failure that prevented her from providing perfect care. Learning to practice the fourth truth didn't make her care less about her patients. It made her more effective because she stopped burning out her compassion through self-blame and resistance to the limitations inherent in her work. She could feel the natural sadness of loss without adding the suffering of believing she should be able to prevent all pain. This path isn't about achieving some perfect, enlightened state where nothing ever bothers you. It's about becoming someone who can dance with whatever life brings, sometimes gracefully, sometimes awkwardly, but always with the understanding that your peace doesn't depend on the music being exactly what you ordered. It's about learning that you can be happy without everything being perfect, peaceful without everything being calm, and whole without everything being fixed. The beautiful thing about these four truths is that they work together. Once you accept that difficulty is part of life, you stop taking challenges personally. Once you see how resistance creates additional suffering, you become motivated to find another way. Once you believe that this suffering can end, you're willing to do the work. And once you begin walking the path of non-resistance, you discover that freedom isn't something you have to earn through perfect performance. It's something that emerges naturally when you stop fighting the present moment. These truths also reveal something profound about the nature of change. Most of us approach personal growth by trying to fix ourselves, improve our circumstances, or eliminate our problems. But the Buddha's path suggests something radically different, that transformation happens not through addition but through subtraction, not by gaining something new, but by releasing what was never necessary in the first place. As you lie here tonight, consider how these truths might apply to your own life. Where are you fighting against the first truth, demanding that life be free from difficulty? Where are you adding the second arrow of resistance to the first arrow of natural pain? What would it feel like to trust that the suffering created by resistance really can end? How might your life change if you believed there was a practical path to freedom from this unnecessary struggle? This understanding leads us to an ancient practice that changes everything, a way of moving through life that the Taoists called Wu Wei, or effortless action. It's the art of knowing when to act and when to yield, when to speak and when to remain silent, when to push forward and when to step back. This practice will show you how to accomplish more by forcing less, how to influence others by controlling them less, and how to find peace by fighting for it less. Let's explore this together. There's an ancient Chinese concept that holds the key to everything we've been exploring together tonight. It's called Wu Wei, which literally translates as non-doing or non-action, but don't let those words fool you into thinking it means being passive or lazy. Wu Wei is actually about the most intelligent kind of action possible. Action that flows with life's natural rhythms, rather than fighting against them. It's the art of accomplishing more by forcing less, of influencing others by controlling them less, of finding peace by fighting for it less. The best way to understand Wu Wei is to observe water. Think about how water moves through the landscape. It never fights the mountain, never argues with the rocks in its path, never insists that the terrain should be different than it is. Instead, water flows around obstacles, finds the path of least resistance, yet gradually shapes the entire landscape in the process. Over time, the gentle persistence of water can carve the Grand Canyon, smooth the sharpest stones, and transform the hardest earth into fertile soil. Water teaches us that softness can be stronger than hardness, that yielding can be more powerful than rigidity. When you try to grasp water tightly in your hands, it slips through your fingers. But when you cup your hands gently, water rests there peacefully. When you fight against a river's current, you exhaust yourself and get nowhere. But when you work with the current, even swimming across it, you can reach your destination with grace and efficiency. This same principle applies to every area of life. Consider Maria, a project manager who used to approach workplace conflicts like a battering ram, trying to force her way through disagreements with logic, authority, and sheer determination. She would prepare elaborate arguments, marshal evidence, and push harder when people resisted her ideas. The result was exhaustion, resentment, and solutions that nobody felt good about implementing. Everything changed when she learned to approach conflicts like water, listening first to understand the landscape, finding the natural openings where agreement already existed, gently flowing around the hardest resistance while gradually wearing down opposition through consistent, patient presence. Her influence actually grew when she stopped trying so hard to control the outcome of every conversation. The most beautiful examples of Wu Wei can be found in sports, where we sometimes witness what psychologists call flow state. Watch a great basketball player in their prime. They're not forcing shots or fighting the defense. They're reading the moment, responding to what the situation offers, moving with an intelligence that seems to transcend thinking. When Michael Jordan made his most legendary plays, he wasn't overpowering opponents through brute force. He was dancing with the rhythm of the game, finding openings that appeared for just a split second, responding with a speed and grace that looked effortless. The same is true for musicians who've mastered their craft. Listen to a jazz pianist improvising. They're not forcing melodies or fighting the music. They're in conversation with the song, responding to what each moment offers, letting the music flow through them rather than trying to dominate it. The most moving performances happen when the artist stops trying to impress and starts serving the music itself. This effortless quality isn't just for elite athletes or professional musicians. You've probably experienced Wu Wei in your own life, even if you didn't have a name for it. Think about a time when you were in deep conversation with someone you love, words flowing naturally, neither of you trying to control the direction, both of you listening and responding authentically. Or remember a moment when you were completely absorbed in an activity you enjoy, gardening, cooking, writing, creating, where time seemed to disappear and everything felt effortless. These are glimpses of Wu Wei, moments when you stopped fighting life and started flowing with it. There's an ancient story that perfectly illustrates how Wu Wei works in practice. A farmer's horse ran away, and his neighbors came to express their sympathy. "How terrible," they said. The farmer replied simply, "Maybe so, maybe not. We'll see." The next day, the horse returned, bringing with it 3 beautiful wild horses. The neighbors rushed over to congratulate the farmer on his good fortune. "How wonderful," they exclaimed. Again, the farmer replied, "Maybe so, maybe not. We'll see." The following day, the farmer's son tried to ride one of the wild horses and fell, breaking his leg badly. The neighbors returned, shaking their heads in sympathy. "How awful," they said. The farmer's response was the same. "Maybe so, maybe not. We'll see." A week later, military officers came through the village, conscripting all the young men for a war that would likely claim many lives. They passed over the farmer's son because of his broken leg. The neighbors came again, amazed at the farmer's luck. "How fortunate," they said. And the farmer smiled gently. "Maybe so, maybe not. We'll see." This story illustrates the heart of Wu Wei. The farmer wasn't passive or indifferent to what happened. He cared for his horse, tended to his son's injury, and engaged fully with each situation as it arose. But he didn't waste energy fighting against circumstances he couldn't control, or trying to figure out the ultimate meaning of every event. He understood that life has its own intelligence, its own timing, its own way of unfolding, that's often beyond our ability to predict or manage. His response was to meet each moment with presence and skill, without attachment to how things should go. This kind of trust in life's intelligence requires a fundamental shift in how we think about control. Most of us have been taught that being responsible means being in charge, that caring means controlling, that strength means forcing outcomes. But Wu Wei suggests something radically different, that true power comes from knowing when to act and when to yield, when to speak and when to listen, when to hold on and when to let go. Think about David, a father who used to micromanage his teenage daughter's every decision, believing that his constant guidance and correction were signs of good parenting. The more he tried to control her choices, the more she rebelled, and the more their relationship deteriorated. Learning Wu Wei didn't mean becoming a permissive parent. It meant learning to distinguish between moments when his input was helpful and moments when his stepping back would allow her own wisdom to develop. He discovered that by creating space for her to make mistakes and learn from them, by offering support without force, he actually had more positive influence on her life than when he tried to manage every detail. Wu Wei also transforms how we approach our own inner struggles. Instead of fighting anxiety, depression, or difficult emotions with force, we learn to work with them skillfully. This doesn't mean being passive in the face of mental health challenges. It means responding to them with the same intelligence that water uses to move around obstacles. Consider Jennifer, who struggled with insomnia for years, trying every technique and medication to force herself to sleep. The harder she tried to control her sleep, the more elusive it became. Wu Wei taught her to stop fighting her wakefulness and instead create conditions that invited rest, gentle evening routines, acceptance of whatever sleep came naturally, and releasing the story that she had to sleep perfectly to function well. Paradoxically, when she stopped forcing sleep, it began to come more easily. Right now, as you're listening to these words, I invite you to notice where you might be forcing in your own life. Where are you pushing against reality instead of working with it? Are you gripping relationships too tightly out of fear of loss? Are you forcing conversations toward outcomes you've predetermined? Are you fighting your own emotions instead of listening to what they're trying to tell you? Are you exhausting yourself trying to control how other people think, feel, or behave? Take a moment to scan your body and notice where you're holding tension. Are your shoulders braced against some invisible weight? Is your jaw clenched in preparation for a fight that isn't happening? Are your hands forming fists around problems you can't actually solve through gripping? These physical tensions often reflect places where you're applying force instead of flow, where you're fighting life instead of dancing with it. The practice of Wu Wei begins with these small moments of awareness. You notice the forcing, the pushing, the gripping, and then you experiment with softening. Not by giving up or becoming careless, but by finding the middle way between collapse and control. Like learning to hold a butterfly, firm enough that it doesn't fly away, gentle enough that you don't damage its wings. This softening often reveals surprising strength. When you stop fighting your circumstances, you have more energy to respond to them creatively. When you stop trying to control other people, you become more genuinely influential. When you stop forcing solutions, better options often emerge naturally. When you stop resisting your emotions, they move through you more quickly and with less damage. Wu Wei doesn't mean you never take decisive action or stand up for what matters to you. It means your actions come from a place of wisdom rather than reactivity, flow rather than force. Sometimes Wu Wei looks like speaking truth with courage. Sometimes it looks like remaining silent when words would only inflame a situation. Sometimes it means setting clear boundaries, and sometimes it means letting go of boundaries that no longer serve. The key is responding to what the moment actually requires, rather than what your fears or desires demand. As we move deeper into this exploration together, you'll discover that Wu Wei isn't just a philosophy or technique. It's a way of being that emerges naturally when you stop fighting the fundamental nature of existence. It's what happens when you finally trust that life has its own intelligence, its own timing, its own way of unfolding that's often more creative and beneficial than anything your controlling mind could devise. This trust opens the door to stories of transformation that might seem impossible when you're trapped in patterns of force and resistance. Let's explore some of these stories together and see how they might illuminate your own path to freedom. Virginia Woolf, one of the most brilliant writers of the 20th century, struggled for years with what we might recognize today as perfectionism and obsessive control over her creative process. She would write and rewrite the same passages dozens of times, checking and rechecking every word, consumed by an internal critic that was never satisfied. Her sister Vanessa Bell wrote that Virginia would pace her room for hours, trapped in mental loops about whether her latest sentence was worthy, whether her ideas were significant enough, whether her work would be judged harshly by critics. This pattern of mental resistance, fighting against the natural flow of creativity, demanding perfection from each word before allowing the next one to emerge, created tremendous suffering in Woolf's life. She described feeling like she was wrestling with a demon whenever she tried to write, as if she were battling against the very muse she was trying to court. The more she fought for control over her creative process, the more elusive inspiration became. The transformation came when Woolf began what she called writing at the speed of life. Instead of trying to perfect each sentence before moving to the next, she learned to let her thoughts flow onto paper without judgment, trusting that the editing could come later. She wrote to her friend Vita Sackville-West about discovering a new way of writing that feels like falling into a river and letting it carry me where it wants to go. This shift from control to flow revolutionized not only her productivity, but her entire relationship with creativity. In Buddhist terms, Woolf had discovered the principle of non-attachment to outcomes. Instead of clinging to each word as if it had to be perfect, she learned to hold her writing lightly, allowing ideas to emerge and develop naturally. She stopped fighting the imperfect first draft and started trusting the process of refinement. This letting go of control over the immediate result actually led to better long-term results. Some of her most celebrated works, including Mrs. Dalloway and To the Lighthouse, emerged from this more flowing approach to creativity. The Buddhist teaching here is profound. When we stop grasping so tightly for perfection, when we release our death grip on controlling every detail, space opens up for natural intelligence to emerge. Woolf learned that creativity, like water, flows best when it's not forced into rigid channels. Her resistance to imperfection had been blocking the very flow she was trying to create. Our second story comes from Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who faced perhaps the greatest challenge to control that a person can experience, the sudden loss of his ability to walk. When polio struck him at age 39, Roosevelt spent months in what his wife Eleanor described as furious denial, convinced that sheer willpower and determination could restore his legs to normal function. He exhausted himself with painful exercises, experimental treatments, and relentless positive thinking, believing that accepting his paralysis would mean giving up. For years, Roosevelt fought against the reality of his condition, spending enormous energy trying to appear unchanged, hiding his wheelchair from the public, and maintaining the illusion that he was merely temporarily inconvenienced. This resistance created what he privately called a constant background of strain, affecting not only his physical health, but his relationships and his early political effectiveness. He was so focused on what he couldn't do that he was missing opportunities to discover what he could do. The shift came during his time at Warm Springs, Georgia, where Roosevelt encountered other polio survivors who had learned to thrive within their limitations rather than constantly fighting against them. He watched a young woman named Helena Mahoney swim with grace and joy despite having no use of her legs, and later wrote that this moment taught him the difference between accepting what is and giving up on what could be. He began to see that working with his condition skillfully might actually open doors that fighting against it had kept closed. Roosevelt's transformation involved what Buddhists call wise acceptance, not passive resignation, but the intelligent acknowledgement of reality as the starting point for all effective action. Instead of wasting energy on futile battles against unchangeable facts, he channeled that same determination into adapting his approach to leadership. His experience with limitation and vulnerability made him more empathetic to others' struggles, more creative in finding solutions, and ultimately more effective as a leader during some of America's most challenging times. The Buddhist insight here is that resistance to what is blocks our ability to see what's possible. When Roosevelt stopped fighting his paralysis and started working with it, he discovered strengths and capabilities he never would have developed otherwise. His greatest achievements as president came not despite his disability, but because of the wisdom and compassion he developed through learning to flow with, rather than fight against his limitations. He learned that true strength isn't the absence of obstacles, it's the skill to dance with whatever obstacles life presents. Our third story involves Nelson Mandela, and perhaps the most difficult form of letting go, releasing resentment and the desire for revenge. During his 27 years in prison, Mandela had ample justification for hatred, bitterness, and thoughts of vengeance against those who had stolen decades of his life and brutalized his people. For years, he fed these feelings, spending sleepless nights, planning what he would do to his captors when he was free, rehearsing speeches about justice and retribution. Mandela later wrote that this mental rehearsal of revenge was a prison within the prison, consuming energy he needed for survival and preventing him from seeing possibilities for something better than mere payback. He described lying on his narrow cot, replaying past injustices and planning future confrontations, trapped in cycles of anger that only deepened his suffering without changing his circumstances. The resistance to forgiveness felt righteous and justified, but it was also keeping him chained to the very system he opposed. The transformation began when Mandela realized that holding on to resentment was allowing his captors to imprison his mind even while his body was already captive. He wrote, "I knew that if I continued to hate them after I was free, I would still be their prisoner." This insight led him to what he called the most difficult prison escape of all, freeing himself from the need for his oppressors to suffer as he had suffered. This wasn't a sudden or easy shift. Mandela described it as a gradual practice of releasing resentment breath by breath, day by day, choosing forgiveness not because his captors deserved it, but because he deserved freedom from hatred. He began to see his guards as human beings trapped in their own system of fear and conditioning, products of the same apartheid system that had imprisoned him. This perspective shift didn't excuse their actions, but it freed him from the exhausting work of carrying hatred. From a Buddhist perspective, Mandela had discovered one of the most profound truths about suffering, that holding on to anger is like grasping a hot coal with the intent of throwing it at someone else. You're the one who gets burned. His practice of forgiveness wasn't about condoning injustice or becoming passive in the face of oppression. It was about freeing his mental and emotional energy to work effectively for positive change rather than destructive revenge. When Mandela was finally released, his capacity to respond with wisdom rather than reactivity, with reconciliation rather than retribution, helped heal an entire nation. His greatest achievement wasn't just personal freedom, it was demonstrating how the individual practice of letting go can transform collective reality. He showed that true victory over oppression comes not through becoming an oppressor yourself, but through breaking the cycle entirely. Each of these stories illuminates a different facet of the same fundamental truth. Resistance to reality creates unnecessary suffering, while acceptance of reality opens the door to skillful response. Woolf discovered that fighting the creative process blocks creativity itself. Roosevelt learned that resisting limitation prevents us from discovering new capabilities. Mandela found that holding on to resentment imprisons the one who holds it. All three individuals moved from a stance of fighting life to a stance of flowing with life, and in each case, this shift led not to passive resignation but to greater effectiveness, deeper joy, and more meaningful contribution to the world. They learned what the Buddha taught, that letting go isn't giving up, it's giving in to the deeper intelligence that emerges when we stop forcing outcomes and start trusting process. These historical examples show us that the principles we're exploring aren't just ancient philosophy, they're practical wisdom that has helped real people navigate real challenges throughout history. The same transformation available to Woolf, Roosevelt, and Mandela is available to you tonight, in whatever circumstances you're facing, whatever resistance patterns you've been carrying. The path from struggle to flow doesn't require extraordinary circumstances or superhuman strength. It simply requires the willingness to notice where you're fighting reality and the courage to experiment with a different way of being. As we continue this journey together, we'll explore how to cultivate this willingness and courage in your own daily life. One of the most misunderstood concepts in all of Buddhist teaching is non-attachment, and this misunderstanding has kept countless people from experiencing the freedom it offers. When most people hear the word non-attachment, they imagine someone who's cold, distant, emotionally shut down, someone who doesn't care about anything or anyone. But this couldn't be further from the truth of what the Buddha actually taught. Real non-attachment isn't about caring less. It's about loving more freely, without the strangling grip of possession and control. Think of non-attachment like the difference between holding a bird in your hand versus holding a bird in a cage. When you hold a bird gently in your open palm, it may stay for a moment, enjoying the warmth and safety you offer, and then it flies away when it's ready. You've experienced the joy of connection without trying to possess or control the bird's nature. But when you put that same bird in a cage, even a golden one, you may keep its physical presence, but you've killed its spirit, its freedom, its essential birdness. The cage holder has the bird's body, but has lost the bird itself. Non-attachment is learning to love like the open hand, rather than the closed cage. It's discovering that you can care deeply, love fully, and engage completely with life, while holding everything lightly enough that you don't crush it with your need to control it. This isn't emotional distance, It's emotional intelligence. It's the wisdom to know that truly loving someone means wanting their happiness, even when that happiness doesn't center around you. There's a beautiful Zen story about a master who was walking with his student near a river when they came upon a young woman who was afraid to cross because the current was strong. Without hesitation, the master picked up the woman and carried her safely to the other side, then continued walking with his student. Hours later, as they approached their monastery, the student finally burst out, "Master, how could you touch that woman? Our vows forbid such contact." The master smiled gently and replied, "I put her down at the river hours ago. Why are you still carrying her?" This story illustrates the essence of non-attachment. The master helped when help was needed, fully and completely, then let go when the helping was done. He didn't make a story about it, didn't carry it forward into the future, didn't let it define him or create internal conflict. The student, however, was attached to his idea of how a monk should behave, and that attachment was creating suffering hours after the actual event had ended. The master was free because he could engage fully and then release completely. The student was trapped because he was carrying the weight of his judgments and expectations. In our modern world, this principle applies to every area of life, though we rarely recognize our attachments until they start to cause pain. Consider relationships, where attachment often masquerades as love, but actually creates the opposite of what we're seeking. When you're attached to someone, you need them to behave in certain ways for you to feel okay. You need them to call at specific times, express affection in particular ways, make choices that align with your preferences. This isn't love, it's dependency disguised as caring. Think about Sarah, a mother whose adult daughter moved across the country for a new job. Sarah's attachment to being needed, to being central to her daughter's life, created tremendous suffering when the daily phone calls became weekly check-ins. She found herself feeling rejected, abandoned, unimportant, not because her daughter loved her less, but because Sarah was attached to a specific form that love had to take. The attachment was making her miss the love that was actually being offered in new ways. Postcards with thoughtful messages, care packages sent back home, stories shared during their calls about how Sarah's parenting had prepared her daughter for independence. When Sarah learned to practice non-attachment, she didn't love her daughter less, she loved her more skillfully. Instead of needing the relationship to look a certain way, she became curious about what it could become. Instead of mourning what was ending, she started celebrating what was beginning. This shift didn't happen overnight, and it required Sarah to feel the grief of letting go of her old identity as a needed parent while discovering a new identity as a trusted ally. But the freedom that emerged was worth the temporary discomfort of the transition. Non-attachment in relationships also means releasing the exhausting job of trying to change other people. How much energy do you spend wishing your partner was more romantic, your teenager was more communicative, your parent was more understanding, your friend was more reliable? This energy, the mental effort of constantly wanting people to be different than they are, is pure attachment, and it's creating suffering for everyone involved. There's another Zen story about a student who complained to his master The other monks are so difficult to live with. They're noisy, messy, and inconsiderate. How can I find peace in such conditions? The master led the student to a window overlooking the monastery garden and pointed to a large oak tree. Notice how the tree doesn't demand that the wind blow more gently or that the rain fall more softly. It bends with the wind, accepts the rain, and continues growing steadily toward the light. The tree finds peace not by changing the weather, but by flowing with whatever weather comes. Perhaps you can learn to be like the tree. This doesn't mean becoming passive or accepting harmful behavior from others. Non-attachment includes the wisdom to set healthy boundaries, to remove yourself from toxic situations, to speak truth when truth needs speaking. But it means doing these things from a place of clarity rather than reactivity, from wisdom rather than attachment to a specific outcome. You speak your truth because it's true, not because you need the other person to change. You set boundaries because they're healthy, not because you're trying to control someone else's behavior. In the workplace, attachment often shows up as the need for recognition, the fear of failure, or the compulsion to control how others perceive your efforts. Consider Michael, a software developer who was so attached to being seen as the smartest person in the room that he would argue with colleagues even when he knew they might be right, just to maintain his image. This attachment was making him less effective at his actual job, damaging his relationships with teammates, and creating constant stress about maintaining his reputation. Learning non-attachment didn't make Michael care less about doing good work. It freed him to do better work. When he released his attachment to always being right, he could actually listen to others' ideas and incorporate the best ones. When he stopped needing credit for every insight, he could focus on the team's success rather than his individual recognition. Paradoxically, this made him more respected and effective, not less. His colleagues began to trust him more because he was clearly more interested in solutions than in ego protection. Non-attachment to work outcomes also means doing your best without being destroyed by results you can't control. You prepare thoroughly for the presentation, deliver it with skill and authenticity, and then release it into the world without carrying the weight of needing it to be received in a particular way. This doesn't mean you don't care about the outcome. It means you don't make your worth dependent on the outcome. Perhaps the most challenging area for practicing non-attachment is with our self-image, the stories we tell ourselves about who we are, what we're good at, what we deserve, how others should see us. We become attached to being the helpful one, the successful one, the spiritual one, the strong one, and then we suffer whenever reality doesn't match our preferred identity. We fight against aging because we're attached to being young, resist making mistakes because we're attached to being competent, avoid vulnerability because we're attached to being strong. There's a story of a Zen master who was renowned for his wisdom and compassion. One day, a visitor to the monastery watched the master trip and fall while carrying water buckets, spilling water everywhere and getting completely soaked. The visitor expected the master to be embarrassed or frustrated, but instead, the master began laughing with genuine delight. When asked why he was laughing, the master replied, "For 30 years, people have been telling me how graceful and wise I am. Today I got to remember that I'm also clumsy and foolish, and it's wonderful to be complete again. This master had learned to hold his identity lightly, without attachment to maintaining any particular image. He could be wise without needing to always appear wise, graceful without needing to never stumble, respected without needing to protect his reputation. This freedom allowed him to be fully human rather than trying to be a perfect version of himself. Practicing non-attachment with your self-concept means you can make mistakes without your self-worth, collapsing, receive criticism without your identity crumbling, face uncertainty without your sense of control, dissolving into panic. You can be successful without becoming addicted to success, loved without becoming dependent on being loved, strong without becoming rigid about never showing weakness. Now, let's explore this understanding through direct experience. I invite you to take a moment and bring to mind something you've been holding tightly, perhaps a relationship that's changing, a goal you've been struggling to achieve, or an identity you've been trying to maintain. Don't choose something overwhelming. Pick something manageable that you can work with gently. Notice what happens in your body when you think about this attachment. Do your shoulders tense up? Does your breathing become shallow? Do you feel a tightness in your chest or stomach? This physical tension is your body's way of showing you where you're gripping, where you're trying to control something that might not be controllable. Now, imagine holding this situation like you would hold a soap bubble. You can see it, appreciate its beauty, even cup your hands around it to protect it from the wind, but you know that gripping it tightly would destroy it completely. Breathe into this image of holding lightly, of caring without crushing. Notice if the physical tension begins to soften, even slightly. This doesn't mean you stop caring about this person, situation, or aspect of yourself. It means you practice caring in a way that doesn't strangle what you care about. You practice loving in a way that gives space for growth, change, and natural unfolding. You practice engaging fully while holding outcomes lightly. Take a few more breaths with this image of gentle holding, and notice that you can actually feel more connected to what you care about when you're not grasping it so tightly. Like the bird in the open hand, things often stay close when they feel free to leave. People often love us more when they don't feel controlled by our love. Goals often manifest more easily when we're not strangling them with desperation. This practice of non-attachment extends into every moment of daily life. You can practice it while stuck in traffic by releasing your attachment to arriving at a specific time and finding peace in the present moment instead. You can practice it in conversations by listening without needing to change anyone's mind, speaking truth without needing others to agree with you. You can practice it with your emotions by feeling them fully, without needing them to be different than they are. The beautiful paradox of non-attachment is that it often brings us closer to what we truly want than attachment ever could. When you stop needing your partner to express love in specific ways, you become available to receive the love they're actually offering. When you stop being attached to a particular career outcome, you can see opportunities that were invisible when you were focused on only one path. When you release attachment to being seen as perfect, you can finally relax into being authentically yourself, which is usually more attractive than perfection anyway. Non-attachment is also the gateway to genuine compassion, because it frees you from the exhausting work of managing other people's experiences. When you're not attached to your adult child never experiencing pain, you can actually be present for their struggles without being destroyed by them. When you're not attached to your friend making the right choices, you can offer support without becoming controlling. When you're not attached to being the one who solves everyone's problems, you can listen with genuine presence instead of constantly thinking about solutions. As you continue to rest here tonight, practicing this gentle art of non-attachment, you might notice that letting go doesn't make you care less about your life. It makes you more available to actually live it. You stop spending so much energy trying to control outcomes and have more energy available for responding skillfully to whatever outcomes actually arise. You stop fighting so hard to make things happen and become more present to appreciate what's already happening. This shift from attachment to non-attachment is gradual and requires patience with yourself as you learn new ways of being. You'll find yourself gripping again, trying to control again, getting attached to outcomes again, and that's perfectly normal and okay. The practice isn't about perfect non-attachment. It's about noticing attachment with gentleness and gradually, breath by breath, learning to hold life a little more lightly. Each time you practice letting go, you're training your nervous system in a new way of being, teaching your body that safety doesn't come from control, but from the capacity to flow with whatever arises. You're discovering that true security isn't found in making everything stay the same, but in trusting your ability to adapt and respond to change with wisdom and grace. This trust becomes the foundation for a kind of peace that doesn't depend on circumstances being perfect. It emerges from your growing confidence that you can meet any circumstances with an open heart and clear mind. As we continue this journey together, we'll explore how this practice of non-attachment transforms our relationship with the full spectrum of human emotions, teaching us to work with rather than against the natural rhythms of our inner life. One of the most revolutionary insights in all of Buddhist teaching is that you are not your emotions. This might sound obvious, but most of us live as if we are completely defined by whatever we're feeling in any given moment. When sadness arises, we become a sad person. When anger appears, we become an angry person. When anxiety shows up, we become an anxious person. But what if this identification with our emotional weather is exactly what keeps us trapped in unnecessary suffering? The Buddha taught that emotions are like weather patterns moving through the vast sky of awareness. Just as clouds don't stain the sky, emotions don't stain your essential nature. The sky remains untouched, whether it's hosting gentle spring rain, fierce thunderstorms, or brilliant sunshine. In the same way, your awareness remains whole and clear whether it's experiencing joy, sorrow, fear, or peace. The weather changes, but the sky endures. The emotions move, but you remain. This perspective shift is profound because it means you don't have to fix, change, or eliminate difficult emotions to be okay. You don't have to wait for the storm to pass to experience peace. You can find peace in knowing that you are the space in which all weather moves. You don't have to be afraid of your own feelings, because you understand that no emotion, no matter how intense, can actually damage the sky of your being. Let me share the story of Catherine, a high school teacher who used to be completely overwhelmed by her students' emotional outbursts. When a student would have a meltdown, Catherine would absorb that energy like a sponge, taking their anger personally, feeling responsible for their pain, carrying their emotional state home with her every evening. She loved teaching, but the emotional intensity was burning her out, making her dread going to work, affecting her sleep and her relationships. Everything changed when Catherine learned to practice inner weather watching. Instead of immediately absorbing her students' emotions, she began to notice them with curiosity rather than reactivity. When 15-year-old Marcus would storm into her classroom, radiating anger about some injustice he'd experienced, Catherine learned to observe this emotional weather without letting it become her weather. She could see the storm in Marcus without becoming stormy herself. This didn't make Catherine less compassionate. It made her more effectively compassionate. When she wasn't drowning in her students' emotional states, she could actually be present for them, offering the steady calm they needed, rather than adding her own reactivity to their already chaotic inner world. She became like a lighthouse in the storm, visible, reliable, and unshaken by the turbulent weather around her. The practice of inner weather watching begins with a simple but radical shift in language. Instead of saying, "I am angry," you learn to observe, "Anger is here." Instead of, "I am anxious," you notice anxiety is moving through. Instead of, "I am depressed," you recognize sadness has arrived. This isn't just semantic cleverness. It's training yourself to observe emotions as temporary visitors rather than permanent residents. Think about how this works with physical sensations. When you have a headache, you don't say, "I am a headache." You say, "I have a headache." You naturally understand that the pain is something you're experiencing, not something you are. The same wisdom applies to emotions, but most of us have never learned to make this distinction. We've been taught to identify completely with our feeling states, as if temporary emotional weather were our permanent identity. Consider the story of David, a paramedic who worked in one of the busiest emergency departments in the city. For years, he carried every tragic scene he witnessed, every patient he couldn't save, every family member he couldn't comfort enough. The accumulation of grief and trauma was crushing him, leading to what his supervisor called compassion fatigue, the exhaustion that comes from caring so much that you burn out your capacity to care at all. David's transformation began when a Buddhist chaplain at the hospital taught him about emotional weather watching. Instead of trying to shut down his feelings or tough his way through them, David learned to acknowledge each emotion as it arose while maintaining his connection to the spacious awareness that held them all. When overwhelming sadness would come after losing a patient, instead of fighting it or drowning in it, he would breathe and say to himself, "Sadness is here. It's moving through the space of my awareness like a storm moving through the sky." This practice didn't make David feel less, it made him feel more skillfully. He could experience the full impact of his work's emotional intensity without being destroyed by it. He learned that his grief was actually love with nowhere to go, and by honoring it without being consumed by it, he could continue showing up fully for the patients and families who needed him. His capacity for compassion actually increased when he stopped being afraid of his own emotional responses. The inner weather watching practice involves several key elements that anyone can learn. First, you notice when an emotion arises, just as you might notice a change in the physical weather. You don't judge the emotion as good or bad, any more than you would judge rain as wrong or sunshine as right. Weather is simply weather. Second, you observe the emotion with curiosity rather than immediately reacting to it. What does this feeling actually feel like in your body? Where do you sense it most strongly? How does it change from moment to moment? Third, you remind yourself that you are the space in which this emotion is occurring, not the emotion itself. You are the sky, not the cloud. The emotion is something you're experiencing, not something you are. Finally, you allow the emotion to move through without trying to hold on to it if it's pleasant or push it away if it's uncomfortable. Like weather, emotions have their own natural rhythms of arising and passing away when we don't interfere with their flow. Let's explore this practice together right now. Take a moment to scan your inner landscape and notice what emotional weather might be present. Don't go looking for something dramatic, just gently tune in to the background, emotional tone of this moment. Maybe there's a subtle contentment, or perhaps some restlessness, or a quiet sadness, or even just neutrality. Whatever you find is perfectly fine. We're just practicing the art of noticing without immediately doing anything about what we notice. Now, instead of analyzing why you might be feeling this way or trying to change it, simply observe it with the same gentle curiosity you might bring to watching clouds move across the sky. If it's a pleasant emotion, notice any urge to grasp it or make it permanent. If it's uncomfortable, notice any impulse to push it away or fix it quickly. These reactions are natural, but for now, just observe them too, without following them into action. Breathe with whatever you're feeling and see if you can sense the spacious awareness that's able to hold this emotion without being changed by it. Just as the sky isn't damaged by storms, your essential being isn't damaged by difficult emotions. You might be temporarily affected, like the sky being temporarily darkened by clouds, but your basic nature remains whole and clear. This practice becomes especially powerful when we're dealing with what Buddhism calls the difficult guests, emotions like anger, fear, shame, and grief that we typically try to avoid or eliminate as quickly as possible. But these emotions, like all weather, carry important information and energy that can be useful when we learn to work with them skillfully rather than against them. Consider the story of Maria, a single mother who struggled with intense anger whenever her ex-husband was late picking up their children or failed to follow through on his commitments. Her anger felt justified. His behavior was genuinely irresponsible and hurtful to the kids. But the intensity of her rage was exhausting her and frightening her children, creating additional problems on top of the original ones. Maria's breakthrough came when she learned to welcome her anger as a messenger rather than fighting it as an enemy. When she felt that familiar heat rising in her chest, instead of immediately exploding or frantically trying to calm down, she would pause and ask, "What is this anger trying to tell me?" She discovered that beneath the rage was fierce love for her children and clear insight about boundaries that needed to be set. By listening to the anger without being possessed by it, she could respond from wisdom rather than reactivity. This didn't mean Maria never felt angry anymore. It meant she learned to feel angry without the anger controlling her responses. She could access the energy and clarity that anger provided, while maintaining enough spaciousness to choose her actions consciously rather than reacting blindly. Her children began to feel safer around her because they could sense that while she felt her emotions fully, she wasn't at the mercy of them. The space between stimulus and response is perhaps the most important discovery in all of human development. Viktor Frankl, who survived the Nazi concentration camps, said that between stimulus and response there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. This space is where inner weather watching becomes practical wisdom for daily life. Most of the time, we live as if emotions were commands that we must immediately obey. Anger arises, and we must lash out. Fear appears, and we must flee or freeze. Sadness comes, and we must collapse. But emotions are actually more like suggestions than commands, and we always have the choice of how to respond to them. The practice of inner weather watching creates enough space between feeling and acting that we can choose our response rather than being hijacked by our reactions. Think about Sarah, a customer service representative who used to take every angry call personally, feeling attacked and defensive whenever someone raised their voice at her. She would either shut down emotionally or respond with her own irritation, neither of which helped resolve the customer's problem or made her feel good about her work. Learning to observe her emotional weather changed everything. When an angry customer would call, Sarah learned to notice the immediate flare of defensiveness in her chest, while simultaneously remembering that this emotional weather was temporary and workable. She could feel the customer's anger without absorbing it as her own, and she could feel her own defensive response without being controlled by it. This space between the emotional stimulus and her response allowed her to access genuine curiosity about what the customer actually needed, leading to better solutions and less stress for everyone involved. The key insight here is that you don't have to wait for emotions to disappear before you can respond wisely. You can feel fear and still speak truth. You can feel sadness and still show up for your responsibilities. You can feel anger and still respond with kindness. The emotion doesn't have to control your behavior any more than rain has to control your mood. You can feel what you feel and still choose what you do. This understanding is especially powerful when working with anxiety, which often tricks us into believing that we must eliminate the anxious feeling before we can take any positive action. But anxiety, like all emotional weather, is just energy moving through the system. When you stop trying to make it go away and start learning to move with it rather than against it, you discover that you can feel anxious and still do what matters to you. Consider James, a college student who had developed such intense social anxiety that he was skipping classes and avoiding all social interactions. His strategy of trying to eliminate anxiety before engaging with others was actually making the anxiety worse, because avoidance was training his nervous system to see social situations as genuinely dangerous. Learning inner weather watching helped James understand that he could feel the anxiety without letting it make decisions for him. Instead of waiting for the anxiety to disappear before going to class, James learned to say, "Anxiety is here, and I'm going to class anyway." He discovered that he could carry anxious feelings the same way he might carry an umbrella on a cloudy day, acknowledging the weather without letting it determine his destination. Gradually, as James stopped fighting his anxiety and started including it in his daily activities, the intensity began to decrease naturally. His nervous system learned that social situations weren't actually dangerous, even when they felt uncomfortable. The practice of working skillfully with difficult emotions also includes learning to distinguish between clean pain and dirty pain. Clean pain is the natural emotional response to life's challenges, the grief that comes with loss, the fear that arises in genuinely uncertain situations, the anger that emerges when boundaries are violated. This pain is unavoidable and usually quite manageable when we don't resist it. Dirty pain is the additional suffering we create through our resistance to clean pain, the stories we tell ourselves about why we shouldn't be feeling what we're feeling, the judgments we make about our emotional responses, the shame we pile on top of natural human reactions. When you practice inner weather watching, you learn to feel clean pain without adding dirty pain on top of it. You can feel sad without deciding that sadness means you're weak. You can feel scared without concluding that fear makes you a failure. You can feel angry without judging yourself as a bad person for having human reactions to frustrating situations. This ability to feel emotions cleanly, without the added layer of resistance and self-judgment, dramatically reduces the amount of suffering in your daily life. As you continue resting here tonight, practicing this gentle observation of your inner weather, you might notice that emotions become less threatening when you're not trying to control them. Like wild animals that become calm when they sense you're not going to chase or capture them, emotions often settle into their natural rhythms when they feel witnessed rather than managed. You begin to trust your capacity to feel anything without being destroyed by it, and this trust becomes a foundation for engaging more fully with life rather than hiding from its intensity. This practice of emotional weather watching isn't about becoming unfeeling or detached from your human experience. It's about becoming more skilled at feeling, more intelligent about emotions, more capable of using the energy and information that feelings provide without being overwhelmed by them. You develop what Buddhists call equanimity, not the absence of emotion, but the presence of balance within whatever emotions arise. The ultimate goal isn't to control your emotional weather, but to become someone who can thrive in any weather conditions. Like a skilled sailor who knows how to work with wind and waves rather than fighting against them, you learn to use the energy of emotions to navigate toward what matters most to you, rather than being blown off course by every emotional breeze. This skill transforms not only how you relate to your own inner life, but how you show up in all your relationships and responsibilities, bringing a quality of presence and stability that serves everyone around you. As we continue this journey together, we'll explore how this emotional skillfulness becomes the foundation for finding balance in every area of life, discovering the middle way that allows you to engage fully without losing your center. The middle way is perhaps Buddhism's most practical gift to modern life, yet it's often the most misunderstood. Many people think it means finding some lukewarm compromise between extremes, always choosing the safe middle ground, never taking a strong stand about anything. But the Buddha's middle way is far more dynamic and intelligent than that. It's about finding the responsive balance between effort and ease, between caring and letting go, between engagement and detachment in each unique moment. It's not a fixed position, but a flowing dance, constantly adjusting to what life requires right now. The Buddha discovered the middle way through his own painful experience with extremes. Before his awakening, he spent years practicing severe asceticism, depriving his body of food and comfort, believing that enlightenment could only come through punishing the flesh. He became so thin that when he pressed his stomach, he could feel his backbone. But this extreme deprivation only made him weak and unclear, further from wisdom rather than closer to it. When he finally accepted a bowl of rice milk from a village girl, his fellow ascetics abandoned him, believing he had given up on the spiritual path. But the Buddha realized something profound. Neither extreme indulgence nor extreme deprivation led to freedom. The path to awakening lay in the intelligent middle, caring for the body without being enslaved by its desires, engaging with life without being overwhelmed by its demands. Like tuning a stringed instrument, if the string is too tight, it breaks. If it's too loose, it won't make music. The middle way is finding that perfect tension where life can sing. In our daily lives, we constantly face this same challenge of finding the right tension. Consider parenting, where the extremes are easy to spot, but the middle way requires constant recalibration. On one side, there's the helicopter parent who tries to control every aspect of their child's experience, hovering anxiously over homework, orchestrating social interactions, eliminating every possible disappointment or challenge. On the other side, there's the completely hands-off parent who provides no guidance, structure, or support, believing that children should figure everything out for themselves. Neither extreme serves the child's development. The overprotective approach creates anxiety and dependence, robbing children of the confidence that comes from overcoming challenges on their own. The neglectful approach abandons children to navigate complex situations without the wisdom and support they need to learn skillfully from their experiences. The middle way in parenting is what child psychologists call authoritative parenting, providing both warmth and boundaries, support and challenge, guidance and freedom. Let me share the story of Jennifer, a single mother who struggled to find this balance with her teenage son Marcus. After her divorce, Jennifer swung between two extremes, sometimes trying to be her son's best friend, avoiding any conflict or discipline because she felt guilty about the upheaval in his life, and other times becoming rigid and controlling when his grades started slipping and he began staying out past curfew. Neither approach was working. The permissive periods left Marcus feeling insecure and directionless, while the controlling periods created resentment and rebellion. Jennifer's transformation began when she learned that love isn't the absence of boundaries, it's boundaries held with love. She started having honest conversations with Marcus about her expectations and the reasons behind them, involving him in creating family rules rather than imposing them unilaterally. When he tested limits, she responded with firm consistency rather than anger or pleading. When he made good choices, she acknowledged them without overpraising or taking credit for his successes. This middle way approach required her to hold two truths simultaneously, that Marcus needed guidance and that he also needed space to develop his own judgment. The shift wasn't immediate, and there were plenty of moments when Jennifer fell back into old patterns of either over-controlling or under-responding. But gradually, both she and Marcus began to relax into this new balance. Marcus felt both supported and trusted, which gave him the security to take appropriate risks and the motivation to honor his mother's trust. Jennifer learned that she could care deeply about her son's well-being without needing to manage every detail of his experience. The middle way shows up differently in the workplace, where the extremes might be workaholism on one side and complete disengagement on the other. The workaholic believes that worth comes through constant achievement, that more effort always equals better results, that rest is laziness and boundaries are weakness. This approach leads to burnout, strained relationships, and often diminishing returns as exhaustion undermines effectiveness. The disengaged approach swings to the opposite extreme, doing the minimum required, avoiding challenges or growth opportunities, protecting personal time but never investing fully in meaningful work. The middle way in work involves what psychologists call sustainable high performance, bringing full presence and skill to your responsibilities, while maintaining healthy boundaries around time and energy. It means caring about quality without being paralyzed by perfectionism, taking on challenges without overwhelming yourself, collaborating effectively without losing your individual voice. It's the difference between working hard and working frantically, between being dedicated and being consumed. Consider the story of Robert, a small business owner who nearly destroyed both his company and his marriage by swinging between extremes. During busy periods, he would work 16-hour days, 7 days a week, barely seeing his family, convinced that anything less than total dedication would lead to failure. But this intensity was unsustainable, and he would eventually crash, sometimes disappearing from the office for days, feeling so burned out that he couldn't make even simple decisions. His employees never knew which Robert they'd encounter, the manic workaholic or the checked-out burnout case. Robert's journey to the middle way began when his wife threatened to leave and his best employee quit on the same week. He realized that his extreme approach was actually undermining everything he was trying to protect. With the help of a business coach, Robert learned to distinguish between urgent and important tasks, to delegate effectively, and to maintain consistent energy rather than cycling between manic effort and complete depletion. He started taking regular breaks, established firm boundaries around family time, and discovered that this sustainable approach actually improved his decision-making and leadership effectiveness. The middle way required Robert to hold two seemingly contradictory truths: that his business needed his attention and commitment, and that his business would actually thrive more when he wasn't desperately attached to controlling every outcome. He learned to work with focused intensity during work hours, while truly letting go when he was with his family. This presence in both domains made him more effective in each. In relationships, the middle way helps us navigate between the extremes of codependency and isolation. Codependent relationships involve losing yourself in another person's needs, moods, and problems, trying to manage their emotional states, taking responsibility for their happiness while neglecting your own well-being. The opposite extreme is emotional isolation, keeping walls up, never being vulnerable, maintaining independence at the cost of genuine intimacy. Neither approach creates the deep connection that most people are seeking. The middle way in relationships involves what psychologists call differentiation, the ability to remain emotionally connected while maintaining your individual identity. It means you can care deeply about someone without making their feelings your responsibility. You can be influenced by others without losing your center. You can offer support without sacrificing your own needs. You can be intimate without being consumed. Think about Sarah and Michael, a couple who struggled with this balance for years. Sarah tended toward the codependent extreme, absorbing Michael's stress from work, trying to fix his moods, feeling responsible when he was unhappy. Michael swung toward emotional distance, shutting down when conflicts arose, maintaining his independence by avoiding difficult conversations. Both patterns left them feeling lonely and misunderstood, despite living in the same house. Their relationship transformed when they learned to practice what their therapist called loving boundaries. Sarah learned to care about Michael's well-being without making his emotional state her project to manage. She could listen to his work stress with compassion while recognizing that solving his problems wasn't her job. Michael learned that vulnerability wasn't weakness, and that sharing his inner experience actually deepened their connection, rather than threatening his autonomy. Both of them discovered that the middle way in love means being fully yourself while remaining open to being deeply known by another. The practice of finding the middle way requires developing what Buddhists call right effort, not too tight, not too loose, but responsive to what each situation actually requires. This isn't something you figure out once and then apply mechanically to every situation. It's a moment-to-moment attunement, like a jazz musician listening to the music and responding with exactly the right note at exactly the right time. Right effort also means learning to distinguish between productive action and wasteful struggle. When you're applying right effort, you feel energized even when doing difficult things. Your body remains relatively relaxed, your breathing stays natural, and you have a sense of flow even in challenging circumstances. When you're struggling wastefully, your body tenses unnecessarily, your breathing becomes shallow, and you feel like you're swimming against a riptide. Learning to recognize these differences in your own body becomes your guide to finding the middle way in any situation. Let's practice this recognition together, right now. Bring to mind a situation in your life where you've been either pushing too hard or not engaging enough, perhaps a relationship where you've been overgiving, a project where you've been procrastinating, or a goal where you've been forcing outcomes. Don't choose something overwhelming. Pick something manageable that you can explore gently. Now imagine approaching this situation with excessive effort, pushing, forcing, trying to control every variable. Notice what happens in your body when you think about this approach. Do you feel tension, urgency, a sense of strain? This physical feedback is information about the unsustainability of extreme effort. Now imagine the opposite extreme, complete withdrawal, giving up, checking out entirely from this situation. Again, notice what happens in your body. Do you feel deflated, disconnected, or perhaps a different kind of tension that comes from avoiding what needs attention? This is your body's way of showing you that complete disengagement isn't the answer either. Finally, imagine approaching this situation with what feels like the right amount of energy, engaged but not frantic, caring but not controlling, responsive but not reactive. Notice how this middle approach feels in your body. There might be a sense of relaxed alertness, like a cat watching a bird, fully present and ready to respond, but not wasting energy in unnecessary tension. This is your nervous system's recognition of the middle way. This body awareness becomes your most reliable guide for practicing the middle way in daily life. When you notice yourself getting tight, rushed, or frantic, it's usually a sign that you've swung toward the extreme of excessive effort. When you notice yourself feeling numb, disconnected, or avoidant, it's often a signal that you've moved toward the extreme of withdrawal. Both extremes create suffering, and both offer opportunities to return to the responsive center. The middle way also applies to how you relate to spiritual practice itself. Some people approach meditation, mindfulness, or personal growth with the same driven intensity they bring to everything else, turning inner work into another form of achievement and performance. Others treat spiritual practice as something to dabble in when it's convenient, never committing deeply enough to experience real transformation. The middle way in spiritual practice involves consistent, gentle engagement, showing up regularly without turning your inner development into another source of stress. This balance extends to how you work with difficult emotions, challenging relationships, and unexpected life changes. You don't have to fix everything immediately, but you also don't ignore what needs attention. You don't have to have all the answers, but you don't abdicate responsibility for thoughtful response. You don't have to be perfect, but you don't use this as an excuse to stop growing. The middle way is always asking, what does this moment actually require from me? And how can I offer that without depleting myself or avoiding my responsibility? As you integrate this understanding into your daily life, you'll discover that the middle way isn't a compromise between extremes. It's often the most courageous and skillful response available. It takes courage to remain open when you want to shut down, to stay engaged when you want to control, to keep caring when you want to give up. It requires skill to read each situation freshly, rather than applying habitual responses. But this courage and skill develop naturally as you practice, and the middle way becomes less of a technique and more of a way of being. The beautiful thing about the middle way is that it's always available, no matter how far you've swung toward either extreme. If you notice you've been pushing too hard, you can soften without collapsing. If you realize you've been avoiding something important, you can engage without becoming obsessive. Each moment offers a fresh opportunity to find the balance that serves both your well-being and your effectiveness in the world. This practice of dynamic balance becomes a foundation for navigating all of life's challenges with greater ease and wisdom. Instead of being thrown off center by every change or difficulty, you develop the capacity to adjust and respond while maintaining your essential stability. Like a tree that bends in the wind but doesn't break, you learn to move with life's forces without losing your rootedness in what matters most. This flexibility and strength prepare you for exploring even deeper territories of letting go, where the very sense of a separate self that experiences suffering begins to dissolve into something much more spacious and free. Let's continue this journey together into the profound freedom that awaits when we release our grip on the illusion of control entirely. As we journey deeper into the heart of Buddhist wisdom, we encounter one of the most liberating yet challenging insights of all: the recognition that control, as we typically understand it, is largely an illusion. This doesn't mean that our actions don't matter, or that we're powerless to influence our lives. It means that the tight grip we maintain on trying to manage outcomes, other people's responses, and the unfolding of events is both exhausting and ultimately futile. Learning to release this grip isn't giving up. It's waking up to a more intelligent and peaceful way of engaging with life. The Buddha taught something called dependent origination, which reveals that everything that exists arises in dependence upon multiple causes and conditions. Nothing exists independently or in isolation. Your thoughts depend on your experiences, your mood, your physical state, what you had for breakfast, the weather, the conversation you had yesterday, and countless other factors you're not even aware of. Your relationships depend on both people's histories, their current circumstances, their families of origin, their stress levels, their health, and infinite other conditions that are constantly shifting. Even your successes and failures arise from webs of causation so complex that taking complete credit or blame for outcomes becomes almost comical. This understanding begins to dissolve the myth of the self-made individual who controls their destiny through sheer willpower. Yes, your choices matter enormously, but they're always made within a vast network of conditions that you didn't create and can't fully manage. The weather affects your mood, which influences your decision-making, which impacts your relationships, which shapes your opportunities, which alter your future choices. You're not the puppet master pulling all the strings. You're one element in an infinitely complex dance of interdependence. Consider the story of Elena, a successful architect who spent years believing that her career achievements were entirely the result of her hard work and talent. While those qualities certainly mattered, Elena's success also depended on being born into a family that could afford her education, growing up in a time when women could enter architecture, having professors who encouraged her, meeting clients who appreciated her aesthetic, living in a city with a booming construction industry, and countless other conditions she never chose or controlled. This recognition didn't diminish her accomplishments. It freed her from the exhausting pressure of believing she had to single-handedly create and maintain her success. When Elena's firm faced financial difficulties during an economic downturn, instead of spiraling into self-blame or frantically trying to control every variable, she could see the situation as arising from multiple conditions: market forces, client needs, global economic patterns, political decisions, and natural cycles of boom and bust. This perspective allowed her to respond skillfully to what she could influence, while releasing the futile attempt to control what she couldn't. She focused her energy on adapting her business model rather than fighting against economic realities, and her firm not only survived, but eventually thrived by finding new niches that emerged from the changing conditions. The illusion of control often shows up most painfully in our relationships, where we exhaust ourselves trying to manage other people's feelings, choices, and behaviors. We believe that if we just say the right thing, do the right thing, or give enough love, we can make someone else happy, healthy, or successful. But other people's responses depend on their own complex web of conditions: their upbringing, their current stress levels, their biochemistry, their unhealed wounds, their dreams and fears, their spiritual development, and countless factors that have nothing to do with us. Think about Michael, a father who spent years trying to control his adult son's career choices, believing that his guidance and pressure could steer his son away from what Michael saw as mistakes. The more Michael pushed, the more his son resisted, and their relationship deteriorated as the son began to avoid family gatherings and stopped sharing important life updates. Michael's wake-up call came when he realized that his son's choices were arising from the son's own complex set of conditions: his personality, his generation's values, his experiences that Michael had never had, his needs that Michael couldn't understand, and his path that was ultimately his own to walk. Releasing control didn't mean Michael stopped caring about his son's well-being. It meant he shifted from trying to control his son's choices to offering support for whatever choices his son made. Instead of pushing his agenda, Michael learned to listen, to ask questions without attachment to the answers, and to trust that his son's life would unfold according to its own intelligence. Paradoxically, this shift brought them closer together, as the son felt safe to share his struggles and dreams without fear of judgment or unwanted advice. The recognition of dependent origination also transforms how we understand success and failure. When something goes well, we can appreciate our contribution without inflating our ego with the belief that we're solely responsible. When something goes poorly, we can learn from our part without collapsing under the weight of total blame. Both success and failure arise from countless interweaving conditions, and our role is to respond skillfully to whatever conditions are present, rather than trying to control all the variables. This shift in perspective naturally leads to what Buddhism calls compassion without rescue, the ability to care deeply for others' suffering without feeling responsible for eliminating their pain. True compassion recognizes that each person's journey through difficulty is part of their own complex unfolding, and that our attempts to rescue them from their experience often rob them of the growth and strength that can emerge from meeting challenges directly. This doesn't mean becoming indifferent to others' pain. It means learning to hold space for their pain without making it our project to fix. Consider the story of Janet, a mother whose adult daughter struggled with depression. For years, Janet had tried everything she could think of to make her daughter feel better, researching treatments, finding therapists, offering advice, visiting frequently, sending care packages, even moving closer to provide more support. While her intentions were loving, Janet's constant rescue attempts were actually preventing her daughter from developing her own coping skills and resources. The daughter began to feel like a broken project that needed fixing rather than a whole person capable of navigating her own healing journey. Janet's transformation began when she learned that her daughter's depression was arising from multiple conditions: genetic predisposition, past trauma, current life stresses, neurochemical factors, and spiritual questions that the daughter needed to explore on her own. Janet's love and support were important conditions in her daughter's life, but they weren't the conditions that would ultimately heal the depression. This understanding allowed Janet to shift from trying to cure her daughter to simply being present with her daughter's experience. Instead of constantly offering solutions, Janet learned to listen without immediately trying to fix. Instead of researching treatments for her daughter, she encouraged her daughter to explore what felt right for her own healing process. Instead of visiting with the agenda of cheering her daughter up, Janet showed up simply to be together, allowing space for whatever emotions were present. This shift felt counterintuitive at first. Wasn't she being less helpful by doing less? But her daughter began to open up more, to share her struggles without fear of being overwhelmed by her mother's need to fix them, and to develop confidence in her own ability to navigate difficult periods. The practice of compassion without rescue requires tremendous trust in other people's capacity to handle their own lives, even when they're struggling. It means believing that people are fundamentally whole and capable, even when they're temporarily overwhelmed or confused. It means recognizing that your role in someone else's healing is to provide loving presence and support, not to take responsibility for their recovery. This trust actually becomes a healing force itself, as people feel the relief of being seen as capable rather than fragile, strong rather than broken. This principle applies not only to dramatic situations like depression or addiction, but to the everyday dynamics of all relationships. When your partner has a difficult day at work, compassion without rescue means offering comfort without trying to solve their work problems. When your friend makes choices you think are unwise, it means caring about their well-being without needing to convince them to choose differently. When your teenager struggles with social challenges, it means providing support without trying to manage their social life for them. The release of control also extends to our relationship with global events and circumstances beyond our immediate influence. How much energy do you spend worrying about political situations you can't change, economic forces you can't control, or social problems that feel overwhelming in their complexity? While staying informed and taking appropriate action within your sphere of influence is important, carrying the weight of trying to mentally manage the entire world creates unnecessary suffering without helping anyone. Think about David, a social worker who nearly burned out from carrying the weight of all the injustice and suffering he encountered in his work. He would lie awake at night, thinking about his clients' situations, feeling personally responsible for outcomes he couldn't control, exhausting himself with worry about cases that were influenced by poverty, mental illness, family dynamics, legal systems, and social policies far beyond his individual influence. Learning about dependent origination helped David understand that his clients' situations were arising from complex webs of conditions that included but extended far beyond his individual efforts. This understanding didn't make David care less about his clients. It made him more effective in his caring. Instead of depleting himself with worry about all the conditions he couldn't change, he focused his energy on the conditions he could influence: his presence, his skills, his advocacy within the system, his connection with each person he served. He learned to do his part skillfully, while releasing attachment to controlling outcomes that depended on many factors beyond his reach. This shift not only prevented burnout, but actually made him more helpful to his clients, who could feel his steady presence rather than his anxious urgency to fix their lives. Releasing the illusion of control doesn't mean becoming passive or fatalistic. It means understanding your role more clearly and playing that role more skillfully. You're not the director of the cosmic play, but you are a conscious participant whose choices matter within the larger unfolding. You can't control the weather, but you can choose how to dress and whether to carry an umbrella. You can't control other people's responses, but you can choose how to speak and act with integrity. You can't control outcomes, but you can control the quality of effort and care you bring to any situation. This shift often brings tremendous relief, as if you've been carrying a backpack full of rocks and finally realize you can set it down. The rocks were never yours to carry in the first place. They belong to the complex web of conditions that create all experience. Your job isn't to manage all those conditions, but to respond wisely to whichever conditions are actually present in your life right now. As you rest here tonight, consider what you might be trying to control that isn't actually controllable. Are you carrying responsibility for other people's happiness, trying to manage their emotions or choices? Are you exhausting yourself attempting to force outcomes that depend on many variables beyond your influence? Are you losing sleep over global situations or past events that you can't change? What would it feel like to release these impossible responsibilities and focus your energy on what's actually within your sphere of influence? Notice that letting go of control doesn't mean you care less about the people and causes that matter to you. It means you care more skillfully, more sustainably, more effectively. Like a gardener who tends their plot with dedication, while accepting that the harvest depends on rain, sunshine, soil conditions, and countless other factors beyond their control, you can pour yourself fully into your life while holding outcomes lightly. This understanding of dependent origination and the release of control prepares you for an even deeper recognition that the very sense of being a separate self who needs to control anything is itself part of the illusion that creates suffering. As this recognition deepens, you begin to discover a way of being that flows effortlessly with life's intelligence rather than fighting against it, opening into the profound peace that emerges when the war between yourself and reality finally comes to an end. This peace isn't something you create or achieve. It's something you uncover by removing the obstacles that were hiding it all along. Of all the truths the Buddha taught, perhaps none is more fundamental or more difficult for us to truly accept than the reality of impermanence. Everything that exists is in constant flux, constantly changing, constantly moving toward dissolution and transformation. Our bodies, our relationships, our thoughts, our circumstances, our very sense of who we are, all of it is flowing like water, never the same from moment to moment. Yet most of us live as if permanence were possible, as if we could somehow freeze the good moments and prevent the difficult ones, as if we could stop the river of change through sheer force of will. This resistance to impermanence is the root of so much human suffering. We cling to youth while our bodies age, hold on to relationships while people naturally grow and change, try to preserve peak experiences while life continues to unfold into new territories. We save things for special occasions that may never come, postpone important conversations until it's too late, and live as if we have unlimited time to become who we want to be. But what if accepting impermanence, rather than fighting it, could become the doorway to a deeper peace than any permanent arrangement could ever provide? There's a lesser-known Zen story about a master named Tokusan, who was known for his fierce teaching style and his deep understanding of impermanence. One autumn evening, as he sat with his students watching leaves fall from an ancient maple tree, a young monk asked, "Master, how can I find peace when I know that everything I love will eventually be lost?" Tokusan picked up a fallen leaf, brilliant red and gold, still beautiful despite being separated from its branch. "Tell me," the master said, holding up the leaf, "is this leaf dead or alive?" The student pondered and finally answered, "It's dead, master. It has fallen from the tree and will soon decay." Tokusan smiled and crumbled the leaf in his hand, letting the pieces scatter in the wind. "And yet," he said, "where has its beauty gone? Where is the red that delighted your eyes, the gold that caught the sunlight? Has the tree lost anything essential when the leaf returned to the earth that nourished it?" The student looked confused, so Tokusan continued, "You speak of loss, as if something real could actually disappear. But what if what you call death is simply transformation? What if what you call ending is just a new beginning you haven't learned to recognize yet?" He gestured to the tree, now bare but strong, its branches reaching toward the sky. "Does this tree mourn its leaves, or does it trust that spring will bring new ones? Does it hold on to autumn, or does it flow gracefully into winter, knowing that each season has its own gifts?" The master's teaching points to something profound about how we can relate to the reality of endings. Instead of seeing impermanence as a threat to be resisted, we can learn to see it as the very force that makes life dynamic, meaningful, and beautiful. The preciousness of a moment comes partly from knowing it won't last forever. The depth of love is intensified by the knowledge that our time with those we care about is limited and therefore sacred. This shift in perspective transforms how we experience loss and change. Consider the story of Margaret, a woman who spent her 50s watching her elderly mother slowly decline with dementia. For months, Margaret fought against the reality of her mother's condition, researching every possible treatment, desperately trying to bring back the sharp, witty woman who had raised her. She would visit daily, becoming frustrated and heartbroken when her mother didn't recognize her, when conversations became impossible, when the woman she knew seemed to disappear piece by piece. Margaret's relationship with her mother's illness transformed when she stopped fighting the changes and started meeting her mother exactly where she was in each moment. Instead of mourning the loss of who her mother used to be, Margaret began to discover who her mother was becoming. Without the armor of her sharp intellect, her mother's essential sweetness became more visible. Without the ability to maintain social facades, her mother's capacity for simple joy in small pleasures, a piece of chocolate, a favorite song, the warmth of Margaret's hand, became more apparent. Margaret learned to love her mother in present tense rather than past tense. Each visit became an opportunity to connect with whoever her mother was that day, without the overlay of who she used to be or expectations of who she should be. This didn't eliminate the sadness of watching someone you love change in difficult ways, but it allowed Margaret to find precious moments of connection and even joy within the larger context of loss. She discovered that love itself doesn't require the beloved to remain unchanging. Love can flow and adapt and find new expressions, even within the most challenging transformations. The recognition that everything changes also applies to our own suffering. The emotional pain you're experiencing right now, no matter how intense or persistent it feels, is also impermanent. Depression feels endless when you're in its depths. Anxiety seems permanent when it's dominating your thoughts. Grief appears as if it will never lift when it's crushing your heart. But suffering, like everything else in existence, arises from causes and conditions, and when those conditions change, the suffering naturally transforms as well. This doesn't mean you should simply wait passively for bad feelings to pass. It means understanding that your current emotional state, however difficult, is not a permanent feature of your identity. You are not a depressed person. You are a person experiencing depression that will shift and change like all mental weather. You are not broken. You are going through a challenging phase that, like all phases, contains the seeds of its own transformation. Think about James, a man who experienced what he called the dark year, following his divorce, job loss, and his father's death all within 8 months. For months, James felt like he was drowning in circumstances that seemed to confirm his worst fears about himself and his life. The pain felt so total and overwhelming that he began to believe it was his new permanent reality, that this broken version of himself was who he truly was underneath all his previous successes and relationships. James's healing began not with trying to feel better, but with recognizing that even his darkest moods were constantly shifting. Some mornings the despair felt slightly less heavy. Some afternoons offered moments of unexpected calm. Some evenings brought glimmers of curiosity about what might be possible in his rebuilt life. By tracking these subtle changes, rather than fixating on the overall darkness, James began to see that his emotional landscape was much more fluid than it had appeared when he was identifying completely with the most painful feelings. This awareness didn't cure his depression overnight, but it gave him something crucial to hold on to during the worst moments, the knowledge that this too would pass, that his current state was temporary weather moving through the sky of his being rather than a permanent curse on his existence. As James learned to observe his emotions with this kind of gentle attention, They began to move through him more freely, transforming from stuck, solid blocks of pain into flowing energy that could be felt, honored, and released. Perhaps the most challenging aspect of embracing impermanence is learning to find peace with uncertainty itself. Our minds are constantly trying to predict and control the future, to know how things will turn out, to have some guarantee of security before we can relax into the present moment. But uncertainty isn't a problem to be solved. It's the basic condition of existence. Learning to be comfortable with not knowing becomes a profound spiritual practice that liberates enormous amounts of mental energy we typically waste on futile attempts to figure everything out in advance. Consider the story of Rachel, a single mother who spent years paralyzed by questions about her teenage son's future. Would he get into college? Would he make good choices about drugs and alcohol? Would he find meaningful work? Would he develop healthy relationships? Her mind would spin through endless scenarios, trying to prepare for every possible outcome, as if thinking about all the possibilities would somehow give her control over which ones actually occurred. Rachel's liberation came when she realized that her son's future was being created by countless factors she couldn't see or control: his own evolving values, the friends he would meet, the opportunities that would arise, the challenges that would shape his character, the historical moment he was coming of age in. Her worrying wasn't helping him navigate these influences more skillfully. It was just exhausting her and making her less present for the relationship they had right now. She learned to channel her concern into supporting his current growth and decision-making skills, rather than trying to mentally manage his entire future. This shift allowed Rachel to actually enjoy her son's teenage years, instead of living them in constant anxiety about what was coming next. She could appreciate his emerging independence, celebrate his small victories, and support him through his struggles, without needing to know how everything would ultimately turn out. Paradoxically, this presence and trust actually gave her son more confidence to make good choices, as he felt supported rather than monitored, trusted rather than feared for. One of the most difficult aspects of accepting impermanence is releasing our need for closure in relationships and situations that end without resolution. We want to understand why things happened the way they did, to have final conversations that bring clarity, to tie up loose ends and reach some form of completion before we can move forward. But life rarely provides this kind of neat conclusion. People die with things unsaid, relationships end without explanation, situations dissolve without clear resolution, and we're left holding questions that may never be answered. The demand for closure is really a demand for certainty, for a final understanding that would allow us to file the experience away and stop feeling the discomfort of ambiguity. But what if the discomfort of unfinished business is itself temporary? What if we could learn to carry unresolved questions lightly, without needing them to be answered before we can be at peace? Think about Anna, whose father died suddenly of a heart attack when she was in her 30s, leaving behind years of unfinished emotional business between them. They had been slowly working toward healing old wounds from her childhood, having tentative conversations about his drinking, his absence during her teenage years, and the ways his own troubled upbringing had affected his parenting. His death felt like a book that ended mid-sentence, leaving Anna with so many things she wanted to say, questions she wanted to ask, forgiveness she wanted to offer and receive. For months, Anna tormented herself with imaginary conversations, trying to mentally complete what would never be completed in reality. She replayed their last interactions looking for hidden meanings, researched his family history trying to understand his behavior, and wrote long letters to him that would never be delivered. The more she fought against the reality of incompletion, the more stuck she became in grief that couldn't resolve itself through understanding. Anna's healing began when she stopped trying to finish the unfinished story and started learning to love her father as he was, imperfect, complicated, doing his best with his own limitations and wounds. She realized that their relationship didn't need to be resolved to be complete, that love itself doesn't require perfect understanding or final conversations. The questions she carried about her father became less like problems to be solved and more like ongoing connections to his memory, ways of staying in relationship with him that didn't require his physical presence. This acceptance of incompletion became a doorway to a different kind of closure, not the closure of finished business, but the closure of accepting that some things are meant to remain open, unfinished, mysterious. Anna discovered that she could carry her unresolved feelings about her father the same way she might carry a photograph, not as a burden that weighed her down, but as a tender reminder of a relationship that had shaped her life in ways both painful and precious. The practice of embracing impermanence ultimately teaches us that security doesn't come from making things permanent, but from developing confidence in our ability to flow with whatever changes life brings. Like learning to swim, once you trust that you can stay afloat in moving water, you stop being afraid of waves and currents. You can enjoy the ocean without needing to control its movements. This trust grows gradually as you accumulate evidence that you can survive and even thrive through changes you once thought would destroy you. You've already lived through the loss of every previous version of yourself, the child you were, the teenager, the young adult. You've survived changes in your body, your relationships, your circumstances, your beliefs. Each transition taught you something about your capacity to adapt, to find meaning in new contexts, to discover aspects of yourself that only emerged through the process of change itself. As you rest here tonight, reflecting on the constant flow of impermanence that carries all existence, you might notice that there's something deeply restful about finally stopping the futile effort to make things stay the same. What would it feel like to love your life exactly as it is right now, knowing that it will certainly change? What would it be like to hold your relationships with gratitude for however long they last, without demanding that they last forever? How might you live differently if you truly accepted that your time here is limited and therefore infinitely precious? The acceptance of impermanence doesn't make life less meaningful. It makes every moment more vivid, more poignant, more alive. Like autumn leaves that become most beautiful just before they fall, like music that moves us precisely because each note dissolves into silence, like relationships that deepen through the knowledge that they're not guaranteed to last forever. Impermanence isn't the enemy of love and meaning. It's what gives them their power to transform us, to wake us up, to remind us that this moment, exactly as it is, will never come again. This recognition prepares us for the deepest letting go of all, the dissolution of the very sense of separation that makes us feel like we need to protect ourselves against the flow of life in the first place. There's a profound shift that occurs when you begin to understand the true nature of your mind, not as the chattering voice in your head, but as the vast, open space in which all thoughts, emotions, and experiences arise and pass away. Most people live their entire lives believing they are their thoughts, carried along by every mental current like a leaf in a stream, never realizing they could be the stream itself, or better yet, the sky through which all streams flow. This recognition of your mind's spacious nature is perhaps the most liberating discovery available to human consciousness. In Tibetan Buddhism, there's a teaching that compares the mind to the sky and thoughts to clouds. Just as clouds appear in the sky but never stain or damage it, thoughts arise in awareness but don't fundamentally alter your essential nature. Clouds can be light and wispy, like gentle memories, or dark and stormy like painful emotions, but the sky remains vast, clear, and unaffected by whatever weather passes through it. Your awareness is like that sky, fundamentally open, naturally peaceful, and spacious enough to hold any experience without being diminished by it. This isn't just a beautiful metaphor, it's pointing to something you can directly experience about the nature of consciousness itself. Right now, as you listen to these words, notice that there's a space of awareness in which the words are appearing. This awareness isn't the words themselves, and it isn't the voice in your head that might be commenting on the words. It's the open, knowing presence that's capable of observing both the words and the commentary without being identical to either one. This awareness is what Buddhism calls your Buddha nature, your innate capacity for clear, spacious consciousness that exists independent of the content it holds. Most of us have been trained to identify completely with the content of our minds rather than recognizing the space in which that content appears. We think we are our thoughts, our emotions, our memories, our plans for the future. But what if you're actually the awareness that witnesses all of these mental phenomena? What if the real you is the spacious consciousness that remains present and unchanged, whether you're thinking happy thoughts or sad ones, whether you're remembering the past or imagining the future? Consider the story of Thomas, a research scientist who suffered from what he called thought attacks, periods when his mind would become completely overwhelmed by racing thoughts about his work, his relationships, and his future. These episodes would leave him exhausted and unable to concentrate, as if his own mental activity was attacking him from the inside. Thomas tried various approaches to control his thinking: meditation apps, positive affirmations, cognitive restructuring techniques, but the thoughts seemed to have a life of their own, multiplying faster than he could manage them. Thomas's breakthrough came when a Buddhist teacher introduced him to the sky-like nature of mind. Instead of trying to stop his thoughts or change their content, Thomas learned to identify with the awareness that was observing the thoughts. He discovered that he could step back from the mental storm and rest in the spacious silence that was always present behind the noise. Like moving from standing in the rain to watching it fall from inside a warm house, Thomas learned to observe his thought attacks from the safety of pure awareness. This shift didn't eliminate Thomas's racing thoughts immediately, but it transformed his relationship to them completely. Instead of being caught in the storm, he could watch it pass through the sky of his mind. The thoughts were still there, but they no longer had the power to overwhelm him because he had found his ground in something much larger and more stable than any thought. Thomas described it as discovering that he had been living in one room of a vast mansion, finally realizing there were infinite other rooms available to explore. The cultivation of spacious awareness begins with the simple recognition that you are not your thoughts. This might sound obvious, but most people live as if their thoughts were absolute truth, immediate commands that must be obeyed, or accurate descriptions of reality. But thoughts are actually just mental events that arise and pass away in consciousness, no more substantial than clouds forming and dissolving in an empty sky. They have no more inherent reality than the images in a dream or the characters in a movie. Think about Patricia, a marketing executive who was tormented by a constant inner critic that told her she wasn't good enough, smart enough, or deserving enough to succeed in her career. These thoughts felt so convincing and persistent that Patricia had begun to believe they were simply accurate assessments of her limitations. She would spend hours arguing with the critical voice, trying to prove it wrong, or attempting to replace negative thoughts with positive ones, but the critic always seemed to have the last word. Patricia's liberation began when she learned to see these critical thoughts as clouds passing through the sky of her awareness, rather than truths about her identity. Instead of engaging with the content of the criticism, she started noticing the spacious silence in which the critical voice was appearing. She discovered that she could observe the thoughts without believing them, watch them arise, and pass away without getting caught in their storylines. The critical voice didn't disappear overnight, but it lost its authority once Patricia realized she was the sky, not the cloud. This recognition allowed Patricia to make career decisions from a place of clarity rather than reactivity. When opportunities arose, instead of being paralyzed by self-doubt, she could feel the doubtful thoughts while simultaneously accessing the spacious awareness that saw beyond the mind's limited perspectives. She began to trust her deeper intelligence, not the voice that analyzed and criticized, but the quiet knowing that emerged from stillness. Her work performance actually improved because she was no longer wasting energy fighting with her own mind. The practice of cultivating spacious awareness involves learning to rest attention in the background of experience, rather than getting caught in the foreground. Most of the time, we're completely absorbed in whatever is appearing in consciousness, the next thought, the current emotion, the immediate sensation. But there's always a deeper dimension available, the open space of awareness itself, which remains constant even as its contents constantly change. Learning to access this dimension is like discovering you've been watching a movie and suddenly remembering you can also see the screen on which the movie is playing. Let's explore this together right now. Take a moment to notice whatever thoughts might be arising in your mind, perhaps commentary about these words, planning for tomorrow, memories from earlier today. Don't try to stop the thoughts or change them. Simply observe them with gentle curiosity. Now see if you can sense the space in which these thoughts are appearing, the open, aware presence that's capable of witnessing whatever mental activity is occurring. This witnessing awareness has several remarkable qualities that become apparent as you learn to rest in it more frequently. First, it's completely peaceful, not the peace that comes from the absence of problems, but the deeper peace that remains undisturbed, regardless of what's happening in the foreground of experience. Second, it's naturally compassionate. When you identify with awareness rather than with the content of thoughts and emotions, you automatically have more space to meet whatever arises with kindness rather than reactivity. Third, it's inherently wise. This awareness doesn't need to analyze or figure things out because it sees clearly without the filters of conceptual thinking. Consider the story of Maria, a hospice nurse who discovered the spacious nature of mind during one of the most challenging periods of her career. She was caring for a young father who was dying of cancer, and his family's grief and rage were so intense that Maria found herself completely overwhelmed by the emotional atmosphere in his room. She would leave each shift feeling depleted and traumatized, carrying the family's pain as if it were her own, unable to maintain the emotional boundaries necessary for effective caregiving. Maria's transformation came when she learned to identify with the spacious awareness that could hold all emotions without being flooded by them. Instead of trying to protect herself from the family's pain by becoming emotionally distant, she learned to remain completely present while resting in the sky-like nature of her mind. She could feel the grief and fear in the room without absorbing it into her personal identity, like standing in a rainstorm, but knowing you're not made of water. This allowed her to offer genuine compassion without losing herself in the intensity of others' suffering. The patient and his family sensed Maria's shift immediately. They felt held by her presence in a way that was both deeply personal and somehow universal, as if she were offering them access to the same spacious awareness she had discovered. The father was able to share his fears more openly because he didn't feel like he was burdening Maria with emotions she couldn't handle. The family found moments of peace even in the midst of their devastation because Maria's groundedness reminded them that there was something larger than their pain that could hold it all. This practice of resting in spacious awareness is especially powerful when working with anxiety, which often feels like being trapped in a small, airless room with no escape. But anxiety, like all mental states, arises within the vast space of consciousness. It's not the totality of your experience, even when it feels overwhelming. Learning to identify with the space rather than the anxiety transforms the entire experience from claustrophobic panic to workable energy moving through openness. Think about David, a college student who experienced severe test anxiety that was affecting his academic performance. The anxiety would build for days before exams, creating a cascade of worried thoughts about failure, disappointing his parents, and ruining his future. These thoughts would loop endlessly, each one triggering more anxiety, until David felt like his mind was a prison with no escape route. Traditional relaxation techniques help temporarily, but the underlying pattern of mental claustrophobia remained unchanged. David's breakthrough came when he learned to expand his identity beyond the anxious thoughts to include the spacious awareness in which they were arising. During his next exam period, instead of fighting the anxiety or trying to escape it, he practiced resting in the open sky of consciousness, while allowing the worried thoughts to pass through like clouds. The anxiety was still present, but it no longer felt like a trap because David had found his ground in something much more vast and stable. He could feel anxious while simultaneously being rooted in peace, worried while also being connected to a deeper confidence that transcended any particular outcome. This shift in identity from content to context, from thoughts to awareness, naturally leads to what Buddhists call mental freedom, not the absence of difficult thoughts and emotions, but the liberty to experience them without being enslaved by them. You discover that you can have any thought without believing it, feel any emotion without being controlled by it, face any challenge without losing your essential stability. This freedom isn't something you achieve through effort. It's something you uncover by recognizing what was always already present. The spacious mind also reveals the illusory nature of mental boundaries that normally seem so solid and real. The thoughts that once felt like permanent features of your personality begin to appear more like weather patterns, temporary formations that arise from various conditions and dissolve back into openness. The emotions that used to define your entire state of being become more like music, playing in a vast concert hall, audible and sometimes moving, but not able to overwhelm the fundamental silence from which they emerge and to which they return. This understanding brings tremendous relief from the exhausting project of trying to manage your mental life. Instead of needing to have perfect thoughts, optimal emotions, and complete control over your inner experience, you can relax into the natural spaciousness that has room for everything. Like the sky that's equally present whether it's hosting sunshine or storms, your essential awareness remains undisturbed, whether you're thinking clearly or feeling confused, whether you're peaceful or agitated. As you continue to explore this spacious dimension of mind, you might notice that it has an intelligent, responsive quality that's quite different from the mechanical nature of thinking. This awareness knows things directly, without needing to analyze or compare or figure out. It responds to situations with a creativity and appropriateness that thinking mind could never calculate. It's as if you've been trying to navigate life using only a map when you actually have access to direct perception of the territory itself. The cultivation of spacious awareness gradually becomes less of a practice and more of a remembering, returning again and again to your natural state of open consciousness whenever you notice you've gotten caught in the content of experience. Like learning to ride a bicycle, once you get the feel for this shift in identity, it becomes increasingly automatic. You spend less time lost in mental stories and more time present to the actual richness of each moment. You develop what Zen teachers call beginner's mind, the fresh, curious awareness that meets each experience without the overlay of accumulated judgments and assumptions. This beginner's mind naturally leads to a profound simplification of life. When you're not constantly managing thoughts and emotions, when you're not trying to maintain a particular mental state or avoid unwanted experiences, enormous amounts of energy become available for actually living. You can engage more fully with work, relationships, and creative pursuits because you're not simultaneously running the exhausting background program of mental self-management. Life becomes more direct, more immediate, more alive, because you're meeting it from presence rather than from the complex web of mental commentary that usually mediates your experience. As you rest here tonight, allowing yourself to settle into the natural spaciousness of awareness, you might sense that this openness has been your true home all along. The thoughts, emotions, and experiences that seem so solid and defining begin to reveal their transparent, dreamlike quality. What remains is the simple, undeniable fact of being aware, not aware of something in particular, but just the pure presence of consciousness itself, open, clear, and at peace. This recognition prepares you for the ultimate simplification, discovering that even the sense of being a separate self who has awareness is itself just another cloud passing through the infinite sky of being. From this recognition emerges a way of living that's so natural and effortless, it hardly feels like a practice at all, yet transforms everything it touches with its gentle, persistent light. As you rest deeper into spacious awareness, you begin to notice something remarkable happening to your relationship with wanting itself. The endless mental chatter about needing more, better, different starts to quiet down, not because you're forcing it to stop, but because you're discovering a contentment that doesn't depend on acquiring anything new. This is the natural doorway into what Buddhism calls sacred simplicity, the elegant sufficiency that emerges when you finally stop seeking happiness in all the wrong places. The Buddha once said, "Contentment is natural wealth, luxury is artificial poverty." Most of us have been trained since childhood to believe that more equals better, that happiness lies in the next purchase, the next achievement, the next experience that will finally complete us. But what if that emptiness isn't a problem to be solved through addition? What if it's actually pointing us toward a different kind of fullness altogether? Consider Lisa, a successful tech entrepreneur who built a multi-million-dollar company by her 40th birthday. She had everything she had dreamed of since college: the corner office, the beautiful home, the luxury car. Yet she found herself lying awake at 3 a.m., scrolling through her phone, adding items to online shopping carts, feeling an inexplicable emptiness despite being surrounded by abundance. Lisa's transformation began during a business trip when her flight was delayed for 8 hours in a small airport with no shops, no restaurants, and poor internet. For the first time in years, she was forced to sit with nothing to buy, nothing to achieve, nothing to distract herself with, except her own presence. Initially unbearable, this forced stillness gradually revealed something unexpected, what she later described as enoughness. Not the feeling of having enough things, but the recognition that she was enough, exactly as she was. The Buddha taught, health is the greatest gift, contentment the greatest wealth, faithfulness the best relationship. Voluntary simplicity isn't about deprivation, it's about discernment. Learning to distinguish between what truly nourishes your life and what merely distracts you from living it. This wisdom naturally arises when you spend time in spacious awareness, because from that perspective, you can see clearly what brings genuine satisfaction versus temporary stimulation. Buddhism teaches that craving is one of the root causes of suffering, but there's a difference between natural needs and compulsive wanting. Natural desires arise, get fulfilled, and naturally subside, like hunger that leads to eating, and then feels satisfied. Compulsive wanting is never actually satisfied because it's not really about the object being desired. It's about trying to fill an inner sense of lack that can't be filled from the outside. Think about Robert, a retired teacher who realized he had spent 30 years collecting books he never had time to read. His house was filled with thousands of volumes, each purchased with genuine intention of expanding his knowledge. But the collection had become more about the promise of future wisdom than actual present learning. When Robert spent a month reading only books he already owned, he discovered that many were attempting to answer questions that could only be resolved through lived experience, not through accumulating more information. Better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace, taught the Buddha. Robert gradually donated most of his collection, keeping only books that he genuinely referenced or that held special meaning. The physical space that opened up was matched by a mental spaciousness that emerged when he stopped constantly scanning for the next book that might contain the missing piece of wisdom. He began reading more deeply, reflecting more thoroughly, actually integrating insights instead of immediately moving on to the next promising title. Let's explore a gentle practice for working with the impulse to acquire when it arises from restlessness rather than genuine need. The next time you feel the urge to buy something, check social media, or fill your time with activity, pause for a moment before automatically following the impulse. Take 3 conscious breaths and ask yourself, what am I actually seeking right now? Often, underneath the surface desire for something specific, you'll find a deeper longing for connection, peace, excitement, or meaning. Consider Elena, a single mother who felt constantly stressed about money, worried she couldn't provide enough for her daughter. She would lie awake calculating expenses, comparing their lifestyle to other families, feeling like a failure. Elena's relationship with abundance shifted when she began practicing enough inventory, deliberately noticing moments throughout each day when she and her daughter had everything they actually needed. We have enough food, enough warmth, enough time together right now, she would mentally note during breakfast. This practice didn't change Elena's financial situation, but it transformed her relationship to their circumstances completely. She began to see their life through the lens of sufficiency rather than scarcity, allowing her to make decisions from clarity rather than panic. Her daughter sensed this shift and felt more secure, not because they had more things, but because Elena was more present and less anxious. The Buddha said, "It is not the man who has too little, but the man who craves more, who is poor." The deepest level of voluntary simplicity involves releasing attachment to outcomes and finding contentment in the process of living itself. You can work toward goals without making your happiness dependent on achieving them. Love people without needing them to love you back in specific ways. You engage fully with life while holding everything lightly, like playing a game where you care about playing well but aren't destroyed if you don't win. This lightness naturally emerges as you rest in spacious awareness. From that perspective, you can see that happiness isn't something you need to create or acquire. It's the natural state that emerges when you stop creating unhappiness through resistance and craving. Peace isn't something you need to find. It's what's revealed when you stop disturbing it with mental agitation. As you practice sacred simplicity, your relationship to time begins to change. When you're not constantly rushing toward the next acquisition or achievement, you can actually inhabit the present moment more fully. Time feels more spacious because you're not trying to cram it full of activities designed to make you feel productive or entertained. The Buddha taught, "Few are those among men who reach the farther shore. The rest of mankind only runs about on this side." Simplicity becomes not just a practice, but a way of seeing, a recognition that the most profound experiences are often the simplest ones, that the deepest truths are usually the most obvious ones. What you've been seeking in complexity has been quietly available in the ordinary miracle of just being here, breathing, aware, alive. The practice of sacred simplicity is ultimately about trust, trusting that you are enough, that what you have is enough, that this moment is enough to contain whatever joy, learning, or love is available right now. This trust allows you to stop the exhausting search for completion in external things and rest in the completeness that's always been your essential nature. As the Buddha wisely said, thousands of candles can be lighted from a single candle, and the life of the candle will not be shortened. Happiness never decreases by being shared. This recognition naturally prepares you for the final letting go of all, discovering that even the sense that there's someone who needs to let go of anything is itself just another thought arising in the vast space of being. From this place of profound ordinariness, we'll explore how to rest in the natural state of peace that requires nothing and excludes nothing, perfect and complete, exactly as it is. Here, in this ultimate simplicity, all seeking comes to an end, not through achievement, but through the recognition that what you were seeking was never actually absent. As we near the end of this gentle journey together, there's one final recognition that brings everything into perfect simplicity. Peace isn't something you need to create, achieve, or even find. It's what you are when you stop doing anything to disturb it. Like the sky that remains clear and vast whether clouds are present or absent, your essential nature is already and always at peace, regardless of what experiences are moving through your awareness. The Buddha said, "Peace comes from within. Do not seek it without." All the practices we've explored tonight, letting go of resistance, embracing impermanence, resting in spacious awareness, have been ways of removing the obstacles that were hiding the peace that was never actually absent. You weren't broken and needing to be fixed. You were whole and needing to remember. Right now, as you rest here, notice that there's nothing you need to do to be at peace. You don't need to let go of anything more, understand anything deeper, or become anyone different. Peace is the natural state of awareness when it's not grasping or pushing away. Like settling into warm water, you can simply sink into this natural restfulness that's always been here, waiting patiently beneath all the mental activity. Let your breath find its own rhythm. Let your thoughts come and go like gentle waves. Let yourself be held by the vast, tender awareness that you are, not the small self that worries and wants, but the open space of being itself. Here, in this ultimate simplicity, all seeking ends not through finding something new, but through recognizing what was never lost. Rest now in your natural state of peace, knowing that this is who you've always been beneath the stories, beneath the struggle, beneath the search. You are home. You are whole. You are free.